The commission will come to order. Clerk, if you can call the roll.
Delegate Austin, Delegate Torian, Delegate Bulova,
Here.
Senator McPike,
Here.
Senator Eben,
Here.
Senator Pillion, Delegate Krizek,
Here.
Senator Reeves.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Have a couple of comments that I'd like to start the hearing with. And, over the past 2 months, since our last meeting, members of the subcommittee have worked a lot of hours alongside Guidehouse, and I'd like to thank that team personally as the chairman of Colin, you and your team. The enormous amount of work that you guys have done is just, quite frankly, unbelievable, and the pathway and the course to which we've had to do the decision matrix and some of those things and always answering our questions. There are a number of stakeholders in the audience today that have a lot of questions, and hopefully a lot of your questions will be answered today. We're going to take a little time, Colin, after you're done briefing option B, that we'll take some public questions from the audience directed to me as the chairman, and then I'll give that to Colin, and if we can answer some of those. If Colin doesn't have the correct answer you're looking for, if it differs or you have more comments, what we'll do is open it up to where you all can send your written comments into us, and we'll try to address those going forward. We want to try to put as much transparency and daylight on this to allow everybody the opportunity to really understand where we're going, how we're doing it, what the timeframes are, what that's actually going to look like, which is kind of weird because typically we don't do the correct process around here. We put it into law and then figure out how to do it later. So this is an opportunity for us to get it as right as we can. I know that once we get to that point, there'll be a series of legislation that this committee will put forward to try to start that transition, and we know that it's going to be about a 2-year phase in. So if any other members have any opening statements you'd like to give or comments at this time. Delegate Krizek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reiterate what the chairman has said. He's worked extremely hard. And we have had many meetings on this, and we've had, I think this may be our 6th or 7th, maybe 5th, 6th or 7th. I've lost count of committee meeting here that we've been meeting since this time last year, and we still will have one more to go before session starts, where we will have the roadmap ready to go and present to you. So this is your option. This is your opportunity today to weigh in as well. And as the chairman said, please do communicate with us and send in your comments, and for the general public as well, to please do that. We are, through no fault of their own, the way there's so many different agencies. There's really 3 agencies that are currently responsible for gaming in Virginia, and they're really unable to adequately address new gaming issues that may be coming down the pike. As we've, I don't need to mention any specifically, but there's things out there that you and I have not even begin to consider, like artificial intelligence kinds of games that might be out there too. So there's really a lack right now of a comprehensive regulatory oversight process, which really presents risks for consumers and for the Commonwealth and of the legal gaming market. And so we need to address that, and that's what we've been doing. And today we're at our penultimate meeting, and you're going to see where we're going. I think you'll get a good, you'll feel that we've done our job, and we've done our due diligence, and we appreciate all the input from everybody here. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for all your hard work.
Staff for the amount of work and hours, especially our legal counsel, both Stephen and Ashley, having to pull up all these things. And if you can imagine trying to figure out all the different silos and how they interact in those laws and regulations. If you have not gotten a copy of the presentations today, feel free to get up there to my left, your right, as you're facing us. Grab a copy of those, and I think we can make it available online as well. Is that correct, Ashley? Okay, so it's online as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Buckle up, and we're going to be here a while. I haven't set a whole lot of a time frame for Guidehouse. I've given them a lot of flexibility so we can cover it thoroughly, but I'll yield to my colleague, Delegate Bolova.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate those opening remarks, and especially the hard work from our consultants and our legal counsel and staff. And I think you're exactly right. This is a rare opportunity to ensure that we are getting the structure right up front with time to make sure that we are getting appropriate input before the stress of the General Assembly session. Just wanted to make sure, I guess from a process and procedure standpoint, that today from Guidehouse we're going to be receiving information on their recommended approach based on the feedback that we've gotten so far, and based on, I guess, their professional recommendations as well as what they've seen across the country. We do still want to make sure that our stakeholders have an opportunity to weigh in on that, because I think that's a very important part of the process. I think most people here will not have had an advanced copy of what those recommendations might look like. And so for any of you who might have missed it, my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that we're not taking a vote on the recommended approach today. That will be done at a future meeting. This is just a way to tee up what that recommended approach might look like and ensure that everybody in this audience has a chance to provide feedback. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, Colin, are you ready to go? All right. Welcome to the podium, Guidehouse, and they're going to take us to a new direction.
Great, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Joint Subcommittee. Thank you again for taking the time to meet with us and allow us to share some of the outputs of our work. As I've started the last few presentations, I think it's really important to note all of our agency and community partners that have been really critical to this work. It's been the intent, as it's been a very highly collaborative process. The Virginia Lottery, VDAX, the Virginia Racing Commission, ABC, the Office of the Attorney General, Virginia State Police, DHRM, VITA, DPP, DOA, Tax, Behavioral Health, the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling, and of course DLS have been critical in this effort in giving us information and answering our questions and being strong collaborative partners. So I just wanted to take the moment to thank them. Today we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to revisit some of the material briefly that we started this journey with back in May. That was our first presentation, and we're going to speak at a high level to just the current landscape. I think that's really relevant for today, so you all can see how those pieces came together and fueled some of the recommendations that we're going to share. So we're going to speak on that briefly. We're then going to share 13 recommendations and share some additional detail behind each of those recommendations. And then we will certainly begin the process of looking at an implementation roadmap. The goal today is not to share a work plan or share exactly how things will unfold. It's to give you all information, insight into how a process could look, so you all have a good pulse on the cost and the type of implementation it will take for a new model to be successful. So we'll spend some time on those concepts as well. As we've done the last few meetings, please don't hesitate to jump in with any questions. We'd be happy to answer those. Starting our conversation today, we wanted to revisit the actual mandate of the study. What were we asked to do? There are certainly many different ways of approaching this, and all 50 states are taking different approaches, and they're learning and they're evolving. But our task was to really look at the feasibility of establishing a new agency with a consolidation mindset, to really do scenario tests to understand if consolidation was feasible. The intent of the study was for a consolidated model of all gaming types with the exception of lottery. In the spirit of due diligence, you'll see number 4, we did take a full comprehensive view on all potential options, including the lottery. You all will recall option D or option Delta in our last presentation had options where the lottery was consolidated. We'll speak to how that impacted our recommendations and how we stayed aligned with the initial intent. We focused heavily on a timely and orderly transition of an authority of this type. As the chairman mentioned, this is something that doesn't happen often in government. And we felt it was important to be upfront about it being an employee-centric approach and an approach that allowed productivity to maintain the agencies that are providing these services and this regulatory oversight over these very important functions. And of course, and this goes without saying, but the problem gambling prevention and treatment efforts were a top priority throughout our study, and you'll see that noted today. This is a quick picture. This is a slide you all saw in May. It's the exact same slide. So of course, this data has a history back in May, but as you all can see, it is a diverse landscape. So as we think about a consolidated organization, a consolidated gaming commission, we recognize the importance of it having diverse skill sets among its employees and the ability to regulate very different types of games. From electronic gaming to horse racing to traditional lottery, there's a broad array of gaming types in Virginia, and we recognize that and try to hold true to that appreciation. On the right-hand side, you'll see gaming in Virginia by the numbers. I think it goes without saying that this continues to be a growing field. So we also maintain the design principle that this organization needed to scale and needed to be able to understand new growth and how it could adjust to that. Our first meeting was really the beginning of our research and benchmarking process. We learned a lot about other states. The insights we gleaned, we also shared a number of cautions. Each state has a very different landscape. Maryland, a partner state, for example, has a consolidated model with the exception of horse racing. They also handle charitable gaming at a local level. Just one example of the nuances between benchmarking in this particular case. Lotteries are at different parts of their maturity, each of these gaming types, and new gaming entrants are different state to state. So today we will, at times, mention other states, but have really tried to stay true to that lens of approaching with caution and making sure we're gleaning the appropriate insights from what other states are doing. We spoke about the cost-benefit analysis. You'll hear that referenced heavily today, is a guiding principle in our recommendations. That will be our focus today is the recommendations phase. In the next phase of our work, we'll be taking at the high-level roadmap we show you all today as a concept and moving that to the next level of detail. The collaboration in that process will continue as it has to this point. Okay. In our last meeting, we presented this overview of operating models. You'll see at the top an example of the current state. As a reminder, there's 3 agencies managing the current state today. It's a blend of independent and executive agencies. And new gaming types face a challenge of not having a clear home, right? And it's been really discussed on a case-by-case basis. There are different options for consolidation, and they each have pros and cons. I think that's an important point. There's no perfect model, right, amongst these 4. Our goal is to really weigh the costs and benefits and try to strike that right balance. Even among these 4, these are 4 examples, there's many others in between. And there's different flavors of these 4, depending if the organization is an independent agency versus the organization is an executive agency. Even those have significant operational impacts. You can see similar models on the right, but as I mentioned, these are helpful, but also come with cautions. States across the country are also studying this. You'll see Ohio here. They're facilitating their own study on the future of gaming and the impact of operation. So this is an ever-changing field, and you all are not alone in trying to manage this challenge. As we moved towards the cost benefits, this is how we concluded our meeting several weeks ago. Following a review of the costs and the benefits, our team does feel that the options for Consolidated Virginia Gaming Commission are feasible and consolidation should be pursued. I think the challenge is really defining what that looks like and finding that appropriate balance. There's certainly temporary costs with any consolidation, whether it be in the public sector or the private sector. The question is, do those temporary costs, are they outweighed by the benefits and the moving away from the risk of the current fragmented structure? And we certainly believe they are. One unique challenge in this conversation and something that has been top of mind throughout the effort is the lottery operations. Certainly the lottery, the traditional lottery and the iLottery are unique in the Commonwealth, as the Commonwealth is actually managing the operation and the administration of those functions compared to simply serving a regulatory role. And that's something and the potential conflict of interest that exists with that we have embedded throughout our recommendations. And we'll speak to more heavily in a moment. I won't go through these in detail because we shared them last time, but with any consolidation effort, most often your operational benefits come from larger consolidation, right? So when you think about scaling up an organization, in this case, among the 3, the largest is the lottery, of course, from a workforce and infrastructure lens, that's where you do see operational benefits. But you also can create risk, right? Whether it be impacts on productivity, conflicts of interest in this case. And today we're going to spend time talking about where we feel the appropriate balance is between those 2. I do think this reinforces the point that ultimately there is no perfect model. It's trying to strike that right balance between the different options. As we've gone through the cost-benefit analysis over the last weeks, our teams have continued to study the different options, continued stakeholder outreach, and working sessions with the agency. Our team feels option B, which I'll refer to as Bravo through this presentation, is the best path forward from the Commonwealth-wide lens. I think that last part in particular is important. We've approached this effort looking at the aggregate benefits across the ecosystem, and we believe Bravo is something that should strongly be considered. Bravo is a model that keeps the lottery, the iLottery, the one operation that the Commonwealth is managing today in full, a separate organization. It creates a new organization called the Virginia Gaming Commission, which is a consolidation of functions that do exist today. Some functions from the lottery, the majority of the staff would actually come from the lottery that are siloed and sit in the sports wagering and casino focus areas of that organization, from charitable gaming to fantasy contest to the live horse racing and the other functions of the Virginia Racing Commission. We also envision the Virginia Gaming Commission as a home for new gaming types from a regulatory lens. This truly is a one-stop operation for gaming regulation in the Commonwealth, with the exception of the Virginia Lottery. We do note there are additional operational efficiencies for Delta, option D. We believe that's something that should be revisited in the long term in the spirit of a successful transition to a gaming commission and standing up an organization that can be that central regulator for gaming across Virginia. We do believe Bravo, and we'll spend some time today on packaging that, is the best course of action, with option D, Delta, and the potential for consolidating the lottery operation to be a decision down the road. And we'll spend some time focusing on that. We also believe that an independent agency is the best home and the best format for Bravo and the new gaming commission. The ability to competitively source talent, the ability to competitively procure and stand up an organization similar to the culture and the robust nature of the lottery is something that's admired, and I think would be certainly appropriate for the Virginia Gaming Commission as an independent agency. So what we want to do now is go through a little bit of the design principles, what led us to that belief, and then we're going to break it down into 13 different components. When we looked to pick one of these options, for lack of a better term, really to begin our focus of what this could look like, these are the design principles that were top of mind for us. It was very important that we could build a model that can maintain the funding of the beneficiaries that exist today. The Commonwealth certainly has an interest and has a stated interest in who receives the funds of these different gaming types and who benefits from those. Of course, an example would be the horse racing industry and HHR, and we wanted to build a model that would not impact those funding streams and would honor the Commonwealth's current intent of the beneficiaries of those funding. And an option Bravo, which we'll speak to in a moment, adheres to that. We wanted to make sure that we built a model that could best support the prevention, the treatment, and provide recovery services for problem gamblers. We also wanted to build a model, this most importantly will be shown in our implementation roadmap, that allows existing employees to continue to serve their customers while benefiting from cross-training opportunities and additional resources. I think this is not only a benefit from the employees and the dedicated public servants serving these different industries today, but certainly will be an indirect benefit that the industry will benefit from as well. We want to create a structure that can effectively regulate diverse gaming types. As I mentioned earlier, when we looked at the review of Handle, these truly are diverse gaming types. When we think about processes and we think about procedures and policies, they're not going to all be standardized. They all won't be common. And that's something that needs to be appreciated through this process. It's equally important that we build an organization that's sustainable for new gaming types and can help the Commonwealth make decisions on new gaming types and quickly regulate them as desired by the General Assembly. Is an important component of that is helping the Commonwealth understand new gaming types. We'll speak to some gaps in the current ecosystem today, including a central policy office, for example, to help the legislature understand new gaming types and the impact to the existing gaming landscape. And I think this is important, the existing gaming landscape component. Our intent in the model today is to talk about a highly collaborative organization that brings existing gaming types, charitable gaming, for example, and the horse racing industry to the table in a way to think through some of these new gaming types. And we want to speak to that as we demonstrate an example of an organizational structure. Certainly, it's important to bolster the accountability ecosystem through consistent compliance and regulatory standards, and we'll speak to the accountability components that were built into the model. And I think most importantly, providing state and local law enforcement, industry, the public, and other stakeholders with a single point of contact and information. As we've shared in the past, and as you all have heard several times, certainly a widespread pain point in the current structure. Those design principles led us to 13 recommendations. I'm going to go through them briefly here, and then we're going to spend some time on each one. So I will be comprehensive, but also concise, because I want to make sure there's plenty of opportunities to answer questions. Many of these are related. Many of these are very clear from the former presentations, both on the initial research and benchmarking, and certainly the analysis done on costs and benefits. As I mentioned, we do recommend consolidating all gaming regulatory and oversight operations in the Commonwealth, with the exception of the Virginia Lottery, into an independent, centralized Virginia Gaming Commission. We believe in structuring the Virginia Gaming Commission in a way to maximize forecasted economies of scale, facilitate cross-training, and leverage best practices with similar functions across different gaming types. In our last presentation, we spent a lot of time talking about the costs and benefits of economies of scale. As a reminder, this is not an exercise in our lens of immediate cost savings. This is about positioning an agency that can effectively scale for new gaming types. We do think there are savings, and we certainly believe there's economies of scale over the next few years. But in the short term, it continues to be an all-hands-on-deck experience with staffing gaps to fill and roles that need to be established. And I think that's important to note. We do believe in maintaining the Virginia Racing Commission board and transferring HHR, ADW, and simulcast racing regulatory and oversight responsibilities to the Virginia Gaming Commission board. And the term board there is important. We do envision a model, and I'll speak to this in substantial more detail in a moment, that has multiple boards, but one operating organization. And I'll demonstrate how that will work. So while this line may appear that we're building a silo, we intend for this to be a very collaborative process. This is an attempt to maintain some of the deep technical expertise that's critical at the Virginia Racing Commission and bringing that into the organization. Directing the Charitable Gaming Board to advise the Virginia Gaming Commission on all aspects of the conduct of charitable gaming in Virginia. As we know, charitable gaming is a large and diverse stakeholder group, and the Commonwealth has a commitment to providing coaching and services to charities pursuing these operations. And we think the Charitable Gaming Board plays an important role there in advising the Virginia Gaming Commission, and that role should continue. Number 6, establishing a problem gambling division in the VGC that could coordinate with local, state, and national stakeholders to manage problem gambling prevention, recovery, and treatment efforts. This is an example of one of the gaps that we believe an enterprise-wide approach to this would add significant value. In that same spirit, number 7, establishing an external affairs and policy division to recommend gaming policy decisions to legislators and communicate with relevant stakeholders in Virginia. Number 8, establish the executive leadership team in the Virginia Gaming Commission and define roles and responsibilities with a clear division of duties, including elevating the role of the Executive Secretary of Racing. And I'll speak in more detail to that in a moment. Maintaining existing beneficiaries of revenue streams from each gaming type, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Directing the Virginia Gaming Commission to review consolidating technology systems to increase efficiency of core functions, for example, licensing and auditing. In these types of reports, it's often low-hanging fruit to say consolidating IT systems. There's complex and comprehensive detail behind number 10. We won't go into those details today. And there'll be additional steps in the implementation process that will need to be taken before moving forward on any sort of IT consolidation. And to be candid, not all systems will certainly consolidate. We know that up front. But there are opportunities to gain benefits there. And as a central organization stands itself up, they'll move in that direction going forward when appropriate. Number 12, following the implementation of the Consolidated Gaming Commission, consider how to further invest in gaming enforcement. In today's ecosystem, there's not a central agency that can support the Commonwealth in right-sizing enforcement efforts. And when I mention enforcement, I view that different than compliance, that a Virginia Gaming Commission would certainly be leading. We believe following the standing up of this organization, it opens doors for the Commonwealth to think through how they may want to structure enforcement and additional ways to invest that aren't necessarily available today. And number 13, in closing, following the successful launch of the Virginia Gaming Commission, revisit Virginia lottery operations. The conflict would certainly still be present. This is something across the country that people are taking different angles on. Maryland, for example, has a consolidated gaming and lottery commission. But we believe at this current time, the best focus is the organization with the lottery, a distinct organization, and something that should simply be revisited in the future following an analysis on the success of the first few years of the VGC. Okay.
Any members have any questions at this point? Okay, take them up when we're done.
Perfect. Absolutely. So we'll go through these one by one. And of course, as you all have questions, don't hesitate to let us know. Recommendation 1 is about the consolidation itself. The target operating model for the Virginia Gaming Commission is intended to be an efficient, cost-effective, and strong regulator. These are the goals. This is the mandate of the study, our focus. We want an organization to respond to new regulatory and oversight needs, to maintain the Commonwealth's commitment to horse racing and the charitable gaming industries, capture long-term forecasted economies of scale and operational efficiencies that are challenging to manage today in a fragmented structure, increase transparency through centralized annual reporting to the public and Virginia government, and of course, increase accountability for gaming regulation and oversight. As you all will recall from just the handle slide I showed earlier today, there's different reporting cadences, there's different reporting structures. There's not a single entity pulling this together on a regular basis and using that data to advise the legislature and the broader state government. Facilitate a consistent statewide problem gambling strategy across gaming types and to clarify the points of contact for key stakeholders, whether it be local law enforcement, the Virginia State Police, players, industry, legislators, and beyond. This is, from our lens, beyond simply a point of contact and transparency, but a platform for more collaboration. So what I'm showing here, and I want to heavily preface this is a concept. When you get to this phase of organizational design, you start to hit some roadblocks. Any strong organization highly considers the individual skills, talents, competencies, and even capacity of their executives when building out an organizational model. Today is a concept. I think it's a strong concept. I'm going to walk through several pieces of this. You'll see this slide as the backdrop as we walk through the next few recommendations. You see an organization, an independent agency with 3 divisions. The first division on the left, you'll see racing. The middle and the largest division, gaming and regulatory oversight. And then you have an operations division, of course, very standard from an organization of this scale. And you have deputy commissioners of gaming across all 3. On the left, you have an executive secretary of racing and deputy commissioner of gaming. And I'll speak to a moment how we've attempted to elevate that role and what we view as the benefits of that. In the middle of the commissioner of gaming and regulatory oversight, this is a very important function, and this is where the largest bulk of staff are today. Most of them sit focused on casinos and sports wagering, but they also sit at VDAX today. The gaming compliance unit is intended to conduct in-person inspections of gaming locales to ensure that the proper internal controls and procedures are being followed. The auditing unit verifies the accuracy of financial data provided by gaming operators. The licensing and investigations unit conducts background investigations and processes, issues licenses for all gaming types. And the electronic gaming operations unit manages the day-to-day IT gaming environment for the Virginia Gaming Commission. What is also important to note beyond the executives and the impact they would have on this organizational chart is there's many teams and groups within each of these units. So you'll see 3 divisions in units. As I noted, this is for illustrative purposes. The intent is cross-training. The intent is to bring these groups together to more effectively facilitate some of these regulatory operations. But there are nuances, and there will need to be continued focus on making sure this organization has the right skills. There'll need to be gaming programs leadership. And that box in particular will need to be built out following a comprehensive staff analysis. We'll speak to that in our implementation roadmap. Today, in the Bravo model, this would leave an organization of about 150 employees today. Many of them are coming from the Virginia Lottery. The future of the Virginia Lottery would go down to about 300 to 310 employees following the successful rollout of this particular concept. The Virginia Lottery on the left is a separate organization. We've included it here for illustrative purposes. And this is an organization that has several boards. At the top, the Virginia Racing Commission. I'll speak to that more in detail. That will have policy authority over non-gaming related matters with Virginia Racing. A Virginia Charitable Gaming Board continuing to serve its important advisory function, and then a Virginia Gaming Commission. So I'll pause there. You'll see on the right, and I'll go through these in more detail in a moment, there's new offices filling statewide gaps in the moment. We spoke a little bit about the boards and then the authority, and this is certainly would be an area of continued discussion in the spirit of building an organization that can address all gaming-related matters. There are different boards. I think it's important to note all highly collaborative and working with one organization. So while there's different boards to make sure that the appropriate expertise is on these teams to facilitate these decisions, the intent is not to create silos. In the current state today, there's the Virginia Lottery Board, and they've got several responsibilities. In the future, the Virginia Lottery Board will remain focused to the lottery. Sports betting and casinos would move to the Virginia Gaming Commission, and VDACs, charitable gaming and fantasy contests, would move to the Virginia Gaming Commission Board. And the functions at the Virginia Racing related to gaming, not including non-gaming, would move to the Virginia Gaming Commission Board. Live horse racing and non-gaming related matters would remain with the Virginia Racing Commission. And that's really critical. I'll speak to it more in a moment, but there's such deep expertise on the Virginia Racing Commission, and just spending a few minutes with their agendas over the last few years, it's very clear that it's important to have people with the appropriate backgrounds and industries to facilitate those decisions. There's just unique elements that are involved in the non-gaming issues of the Virginia Racing Commission, and we believe that board should remain. New gaming types would go to the Virginia Gaming Commission.
I apologize. I just wanted to ask kind of a timely question on the last slide on recommendation number 2, and was wondering if you could clarify the relationship of the Virginia Racing Commission to the Virginia Gaming Commission. So I know that the Virginia Charitable Gaming Board would be advisory. Just curious about whether that would be the same relationship with the Racing Commission, given that you have solid lines also from the Gaming Commission to the Gaming Commissioner down to that executive secretary.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And this concept that we're looking at here has a gaming commissioner who would essentially be the single point of contact for gaming issues in the Commonwealth and would have 3 deputies. The executive secretary of racing, the focus of the question at hand. In this role, the executive secretary of racing and deputy commissioner of gaming would work closely with 2 boards, the Virginia Racing Commission Board on non-gaming related issues, and then gaming issues with the Virginia Gaming Commission. So pari-mutuel wagering is a unique skill set, a unique background, and we believe the Gaming Commission, both the board and the organization, need to benefit from those backgrounds and skills. So in this particular model, the executive secretary of racing and deputy commissioner of gaming would work closely with both boards.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up. So let's say there was a disagreement between the Virginia Racing Commission and the Virginia Gaming Commission. What do you do then? And that's what I'm trying to get at, is one advisory to the other, is one subservient to the other? Because I hate to set up a situation where you've got 2 bosses, they disagree, and which direction you go. And so we want to see if we can get some clarity about exactly what happens under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't envision in this model the Virginia Racing Commission being a subcommittee, for lack of a better term, or subgroup of the Virginia Gaming Commission. We view them as 2 distinct boards with 2 distinct sets of policy authorities. And I can show a slide that demonstrates that a little bit in more detail in a moment.
Okay.
So the Virginia Racing Commission would be the decision maker on non-gaming issues. Gaming-related issues would be facilitated and decided by the Virginia Gaming Commission.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm just wondering how is that different Then option A, then, if the Virginia Racing Commission still has specific autonomy, as curtailed as that might be.
Yeah. And option A is one where some of it was split with HHR in particular. I would think of it as the Virginia Racing Commission's focus would be exclusively on the non-gaming issues. So the option where we're thinking about or we're talking about now is actually not one on the board today. It's an additional flavor of option A. But in the future state and the concept that we're proposing, it would have non-gaming issues as the focus of the Virginia Racing Commission, and all gaming-related matters shifting to the Virginia Gaming Commission. Both served by the same staff and the operating staff. So the intent's not to build a silo, but to build two different policy boards.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And Delegate Bulva, that was a great question and really the focus of our next section. There's just a long list of gaming types and related regulations across sports wagering, casinos, HHR, fantasy contests, charitable gaming, and beyond. And we believe the Virginia Gaming Commission as a citizen board, there's been deep success at the lottery at having a citizen board and being able to make decisions and advise the lottery. And we think that success should be leveraged and continued. And that success is beyond simply the lottery, but also casinos and sports wagering in the recent terms. We believe a similar board for the Virginia Commission could facilitate these decisions. And I think there's a lot of conversations to be had about the size of the board, the backgrounds of the board. We do believe that's important that several stakeholders have a seat at that table. From the Virginia State Police, a member of the Virginia Racing Commission, a member of the Charitable Gaming Board, and other ex officio members, including the Executive Secretary of Racing, and others should be active participants in the discussion of the Virginia Gaming Commission. As we mentioned, the Virginia Racing Commission in this model would remain a board with a different focus. Their focus would be regulating live horse racing involving non-gaming matters, equine health, animal welfare, breeding standards, drug testing of horses and jockeys. This is a complicated mission that involves people with deep expertise in these areas. And we don't believe that these responsibilities could shift to a gaming commission and be done successfully with a citizen board, that this board needs to have those unique backgrounds and maintain their regulatory power over live horse racing and have the specific knowledge and expertise to effectively develop those informed regulations and policies. In the current state today, some of those responsibilities would transfer to the Virginia Gaming Commission. And as I've mentioned, those are the gaming-oriented responsibilities. HHR, ADW, simulcast racing, licensing, standards, permits, those types of components. We fully recognize that there's differences between parimutuel wagering and other types of gaming types, but we also recognize there's similarities. And while this may seem that we are trying to build a silo, the intent is quite the opposite. We're trying to build two boards who can be focused on policy decisions on behalf of the Commonwealth and be served by the same operational staff. The goal is to elevate the role of the Virginia Secretary of Racing to Deputy Commissioner of Gaming so they can have a seat at the table for broader Virginia Gaming Commission projects. We believe one of the risks of the fragmented structure that exists today as new gaming types come to the table and the Commonwealth considers entering into new gaming markets, there's not a structured process to collect feedback from industries that the Commonwealth has already committed to, including horse racing and charitable gaming. And we believe this structure will provide them the opportunity to provide insight and to provide their expertise to the Gaming Commission Board as they make those decisions. So just because I do think it's such a critical point, as I just described the two different boards and their important missions, the Executive Secretary of Racing, the Deputy Commissioner of Gaming in this particular concept would work heavily and collaborate heavily with both boards as they would collaborate with the shared teams in the middle focused on some of the more operational aspects as they would focusing their partnership with the Commissioner of Operations, whose goal would be to give them the tools and resources to not only fulfill their regulatory requirements, but promote the industry that's so important to the Commonwealth. As I mentioned, With charitable gaming, I think this goes without saying the important role that this advisory group plays, and we believe it's critical that they continue serving in that advisory capacity to the new Virginia Gaming Commission. We're now moving into some of the new functions. These are gaps today that don't exist at an ecosystem-wide level that we think are important to fill. One of which is a central problem gambling division, serving as a central resource for problem gamblers and other stakeholders in the Commonwealth. This group would be a core facilitator and coordinator with local, state, national, really at the local level as well, stakeholders to prevent gambling issues, prevention, recovery, and treatment efforts in Virginia. And what you see on the slide is a list of example responsibilities. Of course, known as this organization stood up, and we'll speak to this in a moment with the implementation plan, each of these will be critical parts of the work planning process. And continued working sessions with behavioral health and the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling will be critical to building an impactful work plan. External affairs and policy is a critical role. This is something that was also stressed in the recent JLARC study. This is a gap that exists today. And by building a central gaming office and building out this particular team, this team would have several new teams within it, as you can imagine, focused on managing relationships, open communication with legislators, industry stakeholders, customers, other Virginia agencies, but also facilitating important research and helping the broader state government stay up to date on gaming policy, regulations, and industry best practices. Policies and regulatory changes, reporting, all critical roles that need to be filled today could be facilitated by this office. I'll pause here, Mr. Chair, to see if there's any questions before we dive into the next level of detail.
Any members? Continue on, Colin. Thank you.
What you see with recommendation number 8 is another example of something I want to heavily preface. We think it's important to include examples of key responsibilities, and I think it's also important for this committee as they move forward to think through those clear responsibilities. The goal here is not to create a bureaucracy that slows down the industry. It's to create an organization that can support it. I know most recently with Debbie, for example, and the need to consider weather impacts on a horse race, our goal is to think through ways to build an organization that can have additional infrastructure, that can better serve the Commonwealth, but also remain a strong partner to industry and act quickly. In that intent, we wanted to outline some of the responsibilities we view of these different roles. Certainly at a gaming commissioner level, there's long-term strategic direction, there's managing the agency, there's managing and collaborating with the board, and serving as a central point of contact for all policy matters related to gaming and new gaming types, with the exception of lottery. And then there's the concept of not only being there for policy support, but providing regular reporting to the governor, Secretary of Finance, and the critical members of the legislative teams that you see on the screen here today. There's the Executive Secretary of Racing, and the intent is to give them the autonomy to continue to operate the live horse races and the different critical aspect of their roles today, strategic direction for directing and overseeing all activities of the division, specifically live horse racing regulation, develop maintaining and monitoring relationships with other state agencies, broader stakeholders that are relevant to that industry, and certainly serving as a member of national organizations. The next role is the Deputy Commissioner of Gaming and Regulatory Oversight. This is where they really set the standards and the accountability mechanisms so the Commonwealth can be comfortable that compliance, audit, licensing, investigations, and relevant electronic gaming operations are consistently being monitored and conducted in the strict compliance with laws and regulations set forth in Virginia Code. Certainly in that role, there would be a need to oversee the day-to-day operations of regulated gaming and to facilitate teams that can benefit from cross-training and the economies of scale that we've mentioned. This will be the area of the organization that will face the most growth over time. And having a leader in this role that can understand the similarities between these gaming types, but also have an appreciation for the differences and the need to build out different processes at times is really critical. And of course, the Deputy Commissioner of Operations, which is a very traditional chief operations role, critical to helping this organization in its early stand-up phases and to build an organization that can benefit from appropriate resources. As I mentioned earlier, as I go through those three executives, I think it's worth reminding we're at the point in an organizational design where the unique backgrounds and skills and talents of the individuals serving in these roles has an impact on the organizational structure. So know what we're looking at today is a concept in support of the model, but know that there's going to be situations where some of these boxes slightly move to make sure that the organization's leveraging those backgrounds and the benefits that some of these executives might have. And certainly, there's processes to identify these individuals, and this is part of a much grander transition plan, but also know that there's flexibility in this model for these boxes to move accordingly. The operation itself is intended to be viewed as one large agency to support different boards and different missions. I won't go through these in detail, as I know you all are familiar, but there are different beneficiaries for revenue streams today. And I just think it's important to note again in Recommendation 9, the intent is for those to be maintained and for this model to respect the Commonwealth's current intent around the beneficiaries of these funding. While the regulation and oversight of certain gaming types would transfer to the board, this does not necessarily impact the revenue streams. I'll mention Recommendation 10 and 11 quickly. Certainly, we think it's important to move forward with a review for consolidating technology systems as possible to increase the efficiency of core functions, licensing, auditing, et cetera. And of course, we believe it's important to focus on a standardized approach for reporting to the General Assembly on a regular basis. I think in the long term, given the fast-paced movement of this industry, reporting as frequent as quarterly is certainly appropriate. I do caution it takes time for an organization like this to stand up and to get these gaming types in sync where they're operating on a consistent reporting basis. But that's something that we will focus on in the implementation roadmap period. I know there's certainly a desire for this information, and we'll build out a plan that can get it here as soon as possible. The last two recommendations are really notes for the future that we think that should be maintained and considered over the next few years. But before you can get to these points, you really have to stand up a successful Virginia Gaming Commission. And you have to focus on an organization that doesn't have to balance the conflict of operating a lottery, both traditional and iLottery, but can focus on its regulatory responsibilities for gaming types. And in order to do that and to build that out, other doors open, including thinking through how the Commonwealth can most appropriately resource enforcement efforts. And we want to flag this for the future. And there's certainly an effort to consider other best practices, how these organizations are structured, who they coordinate and collaborate with. And we think this is something that should be a core focus for the new gaming commissioner after standing up the organization. In today's world, there is a lot of wonderful work taking place in this area, but there's also many pain points. And as I mentioned, and we don't believe it's sustainable to consider in the current state transitioning option Delta with a lottery included. Right? We believe the best path is Bravo and keeping that a separate organization, but there are without doubt synergies and infrastructure that the organization could benefit from. Of course, if this is done at a later time, those benefits decrease sharply, but we do think it's something that should be considered down the road. Other states have gone this approach, and other states have very intentionally not gone this approach, but we think it's something that should remain on you all's mind to revisit after a reflection period and after standing up the Virginia Gaming Commission. I want to present a case study. One of the things that has been noted as critical in this model is its ability to facilitate new gaming types. And I will preface again that this is a very simple case study, and it's really illustrative in nature. And great work would need to be done to move these from concepts to something concrete. But skill games, certainly a timely conversation. I wanted to map out for what an organization would look like and how it would move forward with new gaming types as approved. In this particular model, there would be a decision about the leadership of that concept, who would be running point, not only with the industry, but making sure that the processes, the standards, the procedures, and the policies are appropriate. The desire would be for that leadership to exist in an organization, But if it doesn't exist in the current state, the Gaming Commission would be well positioned to go and recruit and hire that talent. And then there would be decisions about existing functions and what made sense to move into a cross-training team and what needed to be distinct. And I think it's important. These boxes, while units, have several teams within them, right? Gaming compliance is a really great example. Those decisions would be made at the executive level at the Deputy Commissioner of Gaming and Regulatory Oversight, who would be a professional with the appropriate background and who would quickly be able to determine how to operationalize new regulations approved by the General Assembly. Other core functions, such as the External Policy Office, who would be making advisory recommendations and providing support to policymakers, the External Affairs function, who would be coordinating those efforts, Problem Gambling Division, which would have this information and be able to both advise and adjust the statewide problem gambling strategy, would all benefit from being in the organization that would consider taking on a new gaming type. And of course, the collaboration benefits from external stakeholders, and the primary point of concept with the Office of Gaming Enforcement at the Virginia State Police is one example, would benefit with having a single partner as it moved from making decisions about new gaming types to operationalizing the regulations.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, that's just a purely hypothetical situation.
The next phase of the presentation is to talk a little bit more in the weeds on the implementation roadmap. It's certainly more granular, but absolutely critical. Before I turn to that, Mr. Chairman, just pause for any other questions on the recommendations themselves.
Any member on the dais?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, thank you. And you can tell me that you're going to address these in the overview of implementation, and I'll wait for that. One thing that I did have a question on is with respect to keeping lottery separate. Because if I recall from earlier slides, we got a lot of the economies of scale and cost savings by keeping lottery in, since they already have a lot of the IT and enforcement and those kind of capabilities already in there. But I also understand kind of the caution about the potential conflict that they're also selling a product as opposed to regulating a product. Was there consideration given to, instead of keeping all of lottery separate, just keeping lottery sales separate, and then all the other things bringing under the Gaming Commission?
Yeah, it's a great question, Delegate Wilba, and we feel very fortunate. Lottery has done a wonderful job as you think about, if you don't mind, I'll pull up the concept organizational structure. Given the nature of this funding and their regulatory obligation to maintain time and distinguish between the level of effort of their staff and which of these functions they're supporting, we actually have a pretty strong pulse on which members of their team, even in some of these central units, such as human resources, ITS, and beyond, are supporting lottery sales versus supporting sports wagering and casinos. So in this model, when you look at the Deputy Commissioner of Operations, not all of those individuals would be new. So some of those would be coming over from the lottery operation today, the ones that are focused primarily on certainly sports wagering and casinos. There are certainly going to be cases, and this is across the board and with any consolidation, where there's people who are splitting their time, and we'll speak about that in the implementation roadmap. But the intent is to move over parts of the central organization today that are focused on sports wagering and casinos and have them come along to the Virginia Gaming Commission.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Mulva.
And these might be things you're going to get more in the weeds on, so I'll just kind of throw both of them out there, and you can tell me to wait. And I guess one, did you get in at all to commission governance structure? And so one of my key goals is to make sure that we've got appropriate levels of expertise and knowledge while also avoiding regulatory capture. And then the other one deals kind of with the issue you talked about with enforcement, because that's really another area that I'm very concerned about, is that with new gaming coming up, trying to fill in areas that we hadn't anticipated, is that up until now we haven't had a group to take ownership of saying, hey, no, that doesn't fit within the law, and actually taking that enforcement action. And so I just wanted to get a better sense of how enforcement works under your model, and whether we actually really need to wait for that better coordination with the Virginia State Police. That seemed like consider or aspirational, and I'm just wondering if that needs to be included in our initial recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And Delegate, I'll start with your second question, if you don't mind. Our focus has been on compliance compared to enforcement, and that is following on from the current state, but it's certainly something we're happy to look into and look at how we can merge the model. I do approach with caution the concept of trying to build an organization in entirety, what we call like a waterfall approach, and its impact on productivity, right, and adding new things to it while an organization's trying to come together, standardize where appropriate procedures, build out core systems compared to adding completely new functions. But I think it's something we certainly can look at. It's not something we focused on today in the current concept.
And Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Bullock.
if I could, so I appreciate that distinction between compliance versus enforcement. And I guess to the degree that we've focused on compliance with legally defined gaming, that's one thing. I guess enforcement with respect to things that aren't necessarily in the code but are happening out there, I would be interested in exploring what the role of the commission would be in tandem with state police for how to do that.
Yes, sir. We'd be happy to explore that.
Delegate Bullock, one of the things we talked about was the VSP. They already have the Office of Gaming Enforcement. They just don't have enough people to have enough troopers or investigators to actually go out. But that would, rather than set up a police force, if you want, like ABC, we thought we'd use the state police, give them plenty of money to put that team together so they'd be a state level force that wouldn't have to worry too much, and they're already there, so it'd be a little easier to do.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. And I guess point well taken. I think the thing that threw me for a loop was the word consider in the recommendation, where if we've got an opportunity to strengthen and provide additional resources now, we might want to leap for that.
Thank you. I know we have the director of the lottery here to reference your other question, Delegate Boulevard, if you wanted to speak to that real quick, if you wanted to come up and speak to that. Welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you, Chairman. Delegate Boulevard, to your question of just retaining the lottery's sales function and consolidating all of sort of the operations function. Otherwise, we have some fairly strict rules regarding what we can spend, what we can spend money on, and essentially lottery proceeds, lottery dollars that are appropriated can only be spent on lottery functions. So in a world in which those other functions were consolidated elsewhere, we'd still need those functions and have to pay for them. So we'd still have this issue of if we were paying for them and essentially receiving the services elsewhere, then those employees would need to allot for their time in a way that we're currently a little bit trying to avoid. And then also the other fear that we have is not necessarily a cost savings one. I think you're correct. Obviously, when you consolidate, you'll experience some cost savings. But we're also trying to protect the functionality that we use to get the sales in the first place. And it's part of our belief that it's the totality of what we do and the staff that we have and the resources we're able to inject in a very direct way that leads to some of that. So some of the consideration was certainly the rules around how we can spend money, but some of it was also as well as protecting the volume of sales itself.
Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Colin, you want to take up?
Yes, sir. The next section is the implementation roadmap.
1 second, Colin. Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess, a follow-up on the problem gaming on page 11 and 19, but page 11, I want to make sure, to clarify, I think it's your number 6 says establishing the problem gaming divisions in the VGC to coordinate, et cetera, but it says to manage problem gaming. And I guess the following slide 19 says somewhat of coordinating. You're not suggesting moving anything from DCHS and the existing problem gaming structure, just more to pinpoint and ensure there's consistency across platforms in regards to problem gaming. Is that correct?
Senator McBride, that's a great question. Our intent is to not move resources from behavioral health into this model. This is really focused on additional programs, coordination, and support. I think there's a lot of work to be done to define their work plan and this particular team's priorities, but the intent is not to move over behavioral health focused resources that sit in that agency today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Colin.
In the last section, I did want to touch briefly on the implementation roadmap. And today is another concept. There's decisions to be made, both operational and policy, that have impact on the ultimate model, what would take what I showed you today, which is a concept, into an actual organizational structure, and the implementation tasks that come with it. We have also very intentionally have appreciated the Joint Subcommittee support to move this in a thoughtful and correct way compared to a quick way. And while it's certainly our intent to maintain momentum and to bring the benefits of a consolidated gaming commission to the table, we think it's equally important to build this in the right way and to be candid with you all about the time it takes to build an organization such as this. We do believe a transition to a fully consolidated Virginia Gaming Commission would take an estimated 2 years. To enable the transition process, for the purposes of these visuals, we begin the implementation activities on July 1, 2025. We know there's a lot of important conversations to be had around governance, around policy, around operating structure over the coming months. And for the purposes of our example, July 1, 2025 is what we call point zero, or essentially the starting point of the process. We think it's equally important to note that this approach is intended to be employee-centric. There are dedicated public servants behind each of these boxes serving important functions today. We're building out a map that's intended to allow them the resources to maintain their productivity in their current state as organizational transitions take place, and allow for thoughtful time for things that are important to them, from where they sit in the organization, their supervisor, to real estate and beyond. Right? These are important decisions that will be mapped out in any implementation roadmap for a consolidation of agencies. There will be unique processes for agency employees in the executive branch today if the General Assembly moves forward with an independent agency. We've had several working sessions with DHRM to map those out, and additional work needs to be done to map those out. But there are thoughtful processes to facilitate those changes so that employees can continue to serve their customers in the important industries in which they regulate. And as I mentioned, the goal is to limit potential disruptions. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. The existing organizations in this roadmap would continue to serve their important roles throughout the process until the Gaming Commission is ready to be stood up. We won't dive into these details in this forum today, but human resources, technology, and operations are the traditional work streams you'll see on this roadmap. And it's really a phased approach. I did want to show you an additional overview, and significantly more thorough deliverables will be provided. But we think this is a 2-year effort. With the first year really be focused on planning, making some of these operational decisions that are contingent on the policy decisions that will be a focus of conversation over the next year, and then moving into a stand-up year, which really is the goal of having them stood up, going live, as we would call it, and beginning regular operations. This is obviously an incredibly high-level visual, and significant work planning needs to be done following decisions. We believe every model, there's lessons to be learned and refinements that need to be made, and we've noted fiscal year 2027 is a critical year for establishing any changes that need to take place. It should go without saying that change management, public awareness, stakeholder buy-in are all critical components to a smooth transition, and I'll speak on those briefly. This is an example of a type of roadmap. There are a lot of steps and a lot of things that need to continue to happen to make sure that these timelines are met. The partners who have supported us in the research and analysis phase of this effort will be important partners going forward, from DHRM and DPB and DOA and VETA to taxation and beyond. Staffing analysis will need to be done at an individual level to make sure employees are placed in a spot that well positions them to serve the Commonwealth. There will be employees that need to be hired. Of course, the priority would be executive leadership. There will be processes for employees transferring from one agency to another. In this particular case, the bulk of the employees in DHRM has significant detail on what that process includes. And there's examples of where this has taken place over the last few years, and we feel fortunate the Commonwealth has built muscle in this area. Of course, there's traditional onboarding that takes place and processes that need to be developed to position the organization for success. There's a variety of technology components that would need to be handled and there's some core operations and governance pieces. Establishing the team that will lead this effort in the interim, certainly having the important conversations about office space and real estate, thinking through policies and procedures that are important, all things that the Commonwealth has successfully done many times in the past. Performance management and the goals of this agency and the expectations that the General Assembly has for it will need to be established, and setting up financial management and budgeting and the several important processes that go with this. There's two other components that we'll speak to more in detail in the implementation process, and that's both building out a stakeholder advisory group to be available to the teams facilitating this and coming up with a temporary governance structure to lead that effort. And in closing, these are the recommendations, and Mr. Chairman, we are happy to take any questions on these concepts. Many of them we'll walk through, and then we'll follow up with any additional information that's needed. And we look forward to sharing our implementation roadmap in more detail in the future.
Colin, thank you. Do any other members of the dais have any follow-up questions? Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I just wanted to go back to an earlier question I asked, and you very well may not have gotten this far into the weeds as far as potential governance structures for the commission, or is that something that we'll need to work out on the legislative front?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I do think it was something that will have to be worked out. When you look at these areas, the funding streams will support the change in the administration as they do today, the different revenue streams, but that's something that would need to be worked out over the coming weeks and is an important part of our implementation roadmap process.
All right, and then one follow-up question, and I guess back to the compliance versus enforcement. Within the gaming commission structure, who would you envision would be the person who'd kind of raise their hand and cry foul if they saw an illegal operator that was not operating within the existing kind of code framework, so that they could relay that on to gaming enforcement? And I'm struggling to find somebody who has power enough to go ahead and actually initiate some kind of a review, as opposed to now where it's kind of been in the silos, and if you don't have responsibility for it, it just kind of goes by the wayside. So I didn't know if that was gaming compliance, whether that was the general counsel, but who did you envision would be that linchpin to say, hey, this person is not abiding by the law, and we're going to take some kind of enforcement action, or ask VSP to take some kind of enforcement action?
Yeah, absolutely. There's three things that come to mind. I think we hope that it is a critical component of the mission of the entire organization, and it's something that's embedded into the culture and their processes and the resources available to all of these staff supporting several gaming types. We also hope the consistent nature of the enforcement, which is a core goal of this organization, will help facilitate that. I do think there's two roles in particular that should be the leaders in the space. Certainly the gaming commissioner at the head of the organization should be the one taking that information, facilitating appropriate actions. And I do think there's discussions to be had on the enforcement component compared to the current regulatory structure, which is follow-up actions as it relates to noncompliance. But we do believe that the deputy commissioner for regulatory oversight should be the expert and the leader in that space, who's facilitating teams that can manage operations to identify these areas and then follow up.
What I'd like to do now, Colin, is if you can grab a seat, and if there's folks that have comments or questions about what you've just been briefed, you're welcome to come to the dais and present that to those of us up here, or if you'd rather just do a written comment to us, we can make that available and do that as well. So are there any comments? Bueller? Wow. Well, Colin, you just did an amazing job. Like, I don't know, Paul and I asked a million questions. So, all right. Well, we'll move on from there. Colin, thank you and your team for being here today. You have something, Paul? Is somebody coming up to speak?
No.
Ross? No? Okay. All right. Well, we'll move forward with our agenda. Ross starts shrinking back there. Yeah. All right. I know we're a little lighthearted up here. And thanks, everybody, for just staying with us. Next, we have Fantasy Sports. JT Foley is the Executive Director of Coalition for Fantasy Sports. So we're going to take up that if you want to come on up. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you as well. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is JT Foley, for the record. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Fantasy Sports. We represent innovative and growing fantasy sports companies, Prize Picks, Underdog, Better, and Dabble. We have over 150,000 users in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And with me today, I've got Josh Kirshner with Nelson Mullins and John Pauley with our member organization, Underdog. Also in attendance, I want to make sure we mention Andrew Winchell from Better, Stuart Wilkinson from Prize Picks, and Kayla Lott with the Coalition for Fantasy Sports. We wanted to do a brief overview with some regulatory considerations we've seen around in different jurisdictions in the country and some best practices. We really appreciate you guys giving us the opportunity to make this presentation today and look forward to working with you moving forward. So I'll hand it off to Josh.
Good afternoon. As JT said, my name is Josh Kirshner. I'm an attorney at Nelson Mullins, outside counsel to Prize Picks, and here on behalf of the coalition. So I think when we're talking today, and I appreciate this committee's focus on modernization and evolving and consolidation within the gaming space, I do want to take a very quick step backwards and talk about kind of the birth of fantasy sports in Virginia, which is really the birth of modern legislated fantasy sports in the United States. So in 2016, Virginia was the first state in the Union, first Commonwealth in the Union, to pass a fantasy sports bill. What I found very interesting in going back and looking at the debate over SB 646 were comments made at the time by Senator McDougal and Delegate Simon that focused incredibly heavily on the reason that this was needed. The reason this bill was needed for a skill-based activity was for consumer protection and proper oversight. I think those are kind of the key words that you will hear over and over again today from this coalition, and certainly the coalition's key focus. It is no secret that these operators and this industry is nothing without its consumers. I do also want to note, in addition to the rapid evolution of fantasy sports, the rapid growth, where we sit from 15 million approximately users nationwide when Virginia passed this bill in 2016, that number's now eclipsed 50 million. 50 million people in the United States that have said they've played fantasy sports in the past year. And so in looking at that number, I hearken back to what Delegate Simon said in 2016, that the bill that was passed then was a first step. This was an evolving process, but we need to get something on the books in order to ensure consumers are protected and that this industry is regulated and there's oversight there. So, as has been discussed previously and highlighted with great brevity by our colleagues at Godhouse, fantasy sports in Virginia is currently overseen by VDAX, and I do want to take a moment and commend VDAX. I don't think this was anything near VDAX's original purpose, and they've done their job with aplomb. They are wonderful to work with. They are sincere in their efforts. They have taken the time out to learn about something that, again, it was not necessarily in the mandate in 2016 when this was first given to them. We are, and I speak on behalf of the coalition here when I say we are incredibly appreciative and fortunate to be able to work with them. So, again, taking that step out in Virginia as well as nationwide, I think it's important to define what we are talking about when we say DFS or daily fantasy sports. So traditionally, we are talking about real money games, meaning there's an entry fee involved in a shorter time frame, whether that is a single day or a week. That's kind of the original idea here. And if you look at Virginia law defining fantasy sports, it matches up well with what's colloquially referred to as UEGA, the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act, a federal piece of legislation that carves out fantasy sports from the definition of bet or wager. And we're talking about 5 unique factors. Multiple players or teams as opposed to, or multiple players from multiple teams, there's an entry fee as opposed to a bet, stake, or wager. There's a prize fixed and known in advance to the participants. The contest is reliant on the participants' knowledge and skill, and the contest itself cannot be based in any way on one single player, a team, a point spread, kind of what you would classically think of as the realm of sports betting. And as JT mentioned off the top here, we are talking just between Underdog and Prize Picks alone, with over 150,000 active users in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That represents over $200 million in entry fees. And when we look at these numbers, we're talking about only since approximately 2020. And prizes paid out to those users of over $150 million. And so, by no means is this casinos or even sports betting in terms of revenue, but we're talking about not only a very material amount of money, but something that is incredibly popular amongst your constituents and amongst the citizens of Virginia. And I do want to point out, as of April 1, VDAX has licensed, there are now licensed and active in the state, 17 different daily fantasy sports operators. And again, when we talk about daily fantasy sports and what that means in 2024, it is much different than what that meant in 2016 when the General Assembly passed this bill. The dominant forms of daily fantasy sports as it exists today and are offered by coalition members are colloquially referred to as pick'em, but that is far from the only type of daily fantasy sports out there. There's salary cap and draft and best ball, and the list goes on, and certainly things I probably haven't even heard of because innovation in this space moves just that quickly. The last kind of backwards-looking piece of this before we look towards the future and discuss future potential regulatory schemes and legislative changes is the testimony that was given before this committee on June 17th. In particular, a group called the Fantasy Sports Alliance provided a presentation that seemed to stake out a different standard for what would qualify as a DFS operator, and said that certain types of licensed daily fantasy sports in the Commonwealth are not actually daily fantasy sports. And I want to point out, one, the operators that were being referred to in that presentation are all currently licensed, are all members in good standing under VDAX, and represent more than 50% of daily fantasy sports operations here. And so where I want to kind of shift from looking backwards to looking forwards is this idea that the coalition welcomes a DFS space for all who want to put consumers first, who understand the responsibilities of being a fantasy sports operator. But as long as you fit within that statute and otherwise satisfy whether it is VDAX or a future gaming commission, I want to make clear that that is what CFS is focused on creating a clear, regulated space in which all these innovators can participate, whether it's the innovators of today, such as my clients, or the innovators of tomorrow. And so, hearkening back to that debate from Senate Bill 646, I use as kind of my guiding point here that idea of consumer protection, about how should we inform, evolve, modernize legislation and regulation in this industry and in this space. And so I think a good place to start, especially on the heels of the presentation y'all just heard on what a future gaming regulator can look like, is providing a brief overview of what does today's national landscape for daily fantasy sports look like across the nation. So broadly in the United States, you have about 90% of jurisdictions in which daily fantasy sports are legal. We're talking about 45 states in Washington, D.C. Of those 45 states in D.C., 23 of them actively regulate fantasy sports, including Virginia, to some degree or another. And as you can see from the chart, the majority of those do it using a gaming commission or gaming board. Zooming in a little bit more and comparing Virginia to those other jurisdictions, you can see that Virginia, like many of these other states, do charge an application or licensing fee, do charge a renewal, but of course, Virginia's is quite significantly less than what the national average is of all of these other states. I would also highlight that when this bill was passed, and I should note, there has been no regulation promulgated pursuant to the Fantasy Contest Act in Virginia. There is a gap when it comes to tax revenue. And in a moment, my colleague, John Pauly, will talk a bit more about that. But, it is a rare position that I get to stand up here and say on behalf of companies that they appreciated not being taxed. However, they welcome and understand why that is something that should be reconsidered at this point.
Chairman? Josh,
Yes, sir.
regarding the taxes, so I'm looking at your chart there. There's 23 states that regulate fantasy sports. Do all of them, besides us, tax fantasy sports?
So not all of them. 17 of the 23 currently tax what's traditionally considered to be gaming revenues.
Right, the gross gaming revenue.
Yes,
I
sir.
see that. Mr. Chairman, following up. And that average is 10%. Can you tell us what the range is between?
Yes, sir. So that range is roughly from, of this, obviously 0% for the states that don't tax. Of the states that do, the low end is just above 5%. And the high end, as it stands today, is, I believe, at 18%.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yeah, go ahead.
If Virginia were to tax at 18%, what would the revenue be based on last year's income?
Understood. So it is difficult to say because Virginia, like the majority of states, interestingly, that regulate daily fantasy sports, they do not produce publicly available total revenue figures.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
just to clarify, you mean the fantasy sports industry doesn't produce those figures because the agency can't, because the agency doesn't get them from the industry. Am I correct?
The agency does not request them of industry members.
And Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, that's because in the code, the agency is not allowed to request that information. So, and you would certainly not give it to them if it's not required, even if they did request it. Am I correct?
I don't want to speak for individual member companies and their business decisions there. What I can say, again, trying to look forward on this is whether it's rule promulgation or via legislation, I think that, by sitting up here and saying that these industry members welcome a tax, inherent in that is the understanding of providing information that goes into calculating that tax, including gaming revenues.
So, Mr. Chairman, final question.
Yeah.
So you would be able to give us that information. The industry could provide that information if we put it in the code and requested it, and then we would have a good idea of what that tax would be. But can you give me a ballpark number what 18% would be?
So let me do this. I think instead of kind of giving a guess, I can point to Virginia and Massachusetts, which are two states that currently publish those figures. I'm sorry. Went way off. I'm on the complete wrong side of the United States. Arizona and Massachusetts. I appreciate it, Senator. My third grade teacher is going to be very embarrassed about my geography skills. But having said that, if you look at the most recent month's figures for each of those states, the gaming revenue the gaming revenue in each of those states was somewhere in the realm of $1 to $2 million. And so from there, if we're talking about an 18% tax, if it's at the low end of that, we're talking about approximately $180,000. If it's at the high end of that, we're looking at something closer to $360,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
is that per licensee?
That is cumulative for those two
In
states.
in those states, they have the same number of licensees as Virginia does?
Those states are, I would say, in a fair range compared to Virginia, if you allow me, maybe plus or minus 3 operators.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you have $150 million or $200 million handle, well, $50 million net, right, if you will, or gross, I guess.
Before you factor in promotional spend and other expenses, yes.
And so we're talking about really 18% of that nationwide if we were to use an 18% tax. I'm just trying to get, we won't go any further down this rabbit hole, but I'm just, right now, just for everybody's, so you know, your elucidation, we're only getting $8,000, what is it right now, the fee that you pay to VDAX?
Correct.
$8,000 or so. Okay. So it could be $300,000.
Yes, and I will just point out, and I appreciate the bearing of this statement will differ, but currently in Virginia, sports betting operators whose revenue represent a significant multiple of fantasy sports are taxed at a 15% rate.
Right. Okay. So you're suggesting we should tax you at 15%?
I'm not. I'm simply. I appreciate a public negotiation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. I just had one quick question for you.
Please.
You all, out of that regulation, don't give any money to problem gaming at this point, right? Is that
There's
correct?
currently no funds earmarked of that 8,300, as far as I know, that is specifically for the
Fees.
problem and treatment fund.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
But, and I think, before passing the torch here, I do think it's important to note that it is something that the coalition is in favor of. In general, this idea of taxing, and it now sounds like we're locked in, and I'll get hard talking to on that.
And you all are 18, correct?
So in general, in the state of Virginia, 18 and up is the law of the land. 18 and up is also the standard age in 17 of 23 jurisdictions that regulate fantasy sports nationwide.
Okay. Well, I would just give you a little bit of warning. I've already kind of talked to you guys about it. We're trying to standardize a lot of things at this time, so I think you guys can be prepared to go to 21, just for planning purposes, just a heads up.
Understood, Senator. And, on those points, whether it is tax, whether it is age, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, what is best for the constituent cannot be the same across all 50 states. And, I'm fortunate to work for a coalition that recognizes that works hand in hand with responsible gaming experts in that, and, understands and embraces whether it is a matter of uniformity, a matter of what is best for the consumer, what provides the safest environment. I think that is something that you will find will be embraced by at least the part of this industry that we represent.
And Mr. Chairman, and you're going to embrace transparency too, right? We're going to get those financial records as well.
So in general, I think I have clients that certainly embrace transparency, are proud of their record on that front, Delegate Kruzek. But in terms of, I don't want to sit up here and say, let me go ahead and email you those today. I don't think that is my place to do, but I appreciate the request. I can, at the very least, say it is something they will take under advisement and something that they strongly encourage should be included in law.
Right. Good answer.
Thank you, Senator. So, with all that being said, it is a perfect segue into talking about responsible gaming in the daily fantasy sports space. And, where I will leave you, and like I said, pass the torch here, is that in 2016, the debate on daily fantasy sports did not really enter into this realm, did not enter into the realm of how do we deal with problematic play? How do we deal with someone who is 18 versus 30 and what their income may look like or what their development may look like? And so you see a lot of states, obviously none as early as Virginia, but many states who passed laws about fantasy sports without ever grappling with this issue. And so it is a credit to the coalition broadly that, as you can see listed here, and as my colleague will talk more about, they have tried to be an industry bearer and set the standard here as opposed to defaulting to a lowest common denominator. And there's a litany of things they are doing. There are a litany of things that they are investing in now that they will do in the future. And for that, I'll leave it to my colleague, John Pauly.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Reeves, Vice Chairman Kruzek, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the chance to speak with you today about the rapidly growing industry of fantasy sports. My name is John Pauly, and I work at Underdog Sports as our Vice President of Government Affairs and Partnerships. For background, Underdog has been a licensed fantasy contest operator in the Commonwealth since July 2020, which includes license renewals and contest type approvals on an annual basis. I know our time is limited, and my colleague has already shared a national and local overview of the fantasy sports landscape. So before we wrap up, I'd like to quickly provide you with comments on two additional topics. One, responsible gaming practices that our companies are already implementing. And two, how the legislature can modernize and strengthen the existing fantasy sports framework. As my colleague has already alluded to, Virginia was the initial trailblazer in fantasy sports. Back in 2016, this body recognized the constituent appetite for these contests and became the first jurisdiction in the country to legalize daily fantasy sports. But a whole lot has changed since 2016, including the evolution of the fantasy sports industry, such as new companies like Underdog and new contest types. And of course, policy trends and best practices have evolved as we learn more about player behavior and new best ways to protect customers playing on our platforms. And that brings me to the slide in front of you. Unfortunately, the topic of responsible gaming was not a key theme throughout the 2016 law, or at least the topic was not as heavily discussed as it is today. Well, despite the gap in the 2016 law, it's important for the subcommittee to know that Underdog and members of the coalition are already implementing critical responsible gaming practices. We have made a commitment to these practices because it fosters a safe, healthy, and sustainable playing environment, and in order to comply with a handful of newer jurisdictions that have legalized daily fantasy sports since 2016. For example, Underdog and members of our coalition have implemented budget and spending alerts, self-exclusion options, deposit and entry limits, cool-off periods, staff training on how to identify behaviors and intervene effectively, responsible messaging, robust security tools that protect player accounts, and finally, anti-fraud measures from the leading KYC and geolocation vendors that also service the two large operators you heard from during the last hearing. I'm also excited to share Underdog's most recent responsible gaming initiative, Guard Dog. Guard Dog is a pioneering $1 million investment initiative that is dedicated to funding and accelerating early-stage startups focused on building new and creative solutions to address responsible gaming. We're proud of Guard Dog's mission, and we look forward to watching it contribute to the dynamic industry, including its reach that will extend far beyond Underdog. So you'll see, while the Commonwealth's current fantasy sports framework does not require licensed operators to comply with strict responsible gaming guardrails, our companies are already implementing these critical practices, and we support the legislature making these practices a requirement for all licensed fantasy operators in the Commonwealth.
John, can I interrupt you real quick? I know you're on a flow. Guard Dog, is that an outside entity or something you all developed within your own coalition?
We developed it at Underdog within the past 6 months.
Okay. Would it be possible for you to get the committee a copy of kind of what it looks and how it functions so we can understand a little bit of that? Because there's technology in some of the other industries as well that have something very similar. And as we try to get to the VGC, maybe there's something that would work across all the platforms.
Yes, we'd love to share that with you.
All right, thank you.
And now to conclude with our final slide. Before we leave you today, Underdog and other members of our coalition believe the legislature has the unique opportunity to modernize the current statutory framework by implementing new standards and thresholds that align with the current fantasy sports landscape. In addition to consolidating multiple forms of gaming under one commission, which we support, the legislature may also want to consider enhancing the Commonwealth's fantasy sports law in the following 4 ways. 1, adding a tax rate to generate new revenue from licensed and vetted operators. 2, allocating some of that new tax revenue to critical funds that could address prevention and treatment for responsible gaming. 3, adding consumer protections and the responsible gaming guardrails that I'd previously mentioned. And finally, ensuring competition and product choice by clarifying that fantasy sports consumers in the Commonwealth can continue playing the games they love and have been enjoying since 2016. I see our time is coming to a close, so I'll leave it there. Thank you for letting us share our perspective on the fantasy sports industry here in the Commonwealth, and my colleagues and I are happy to answer questions, whether now or down the road. Thank you.
John, thank you. Any other members of the guys have questions?
Yeah.
Senator Evan.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with this industry, but I know that in some states there's been some activity around fantasy sports operators that offer single-player proposition pick-em style products. And is that a gray area, or are there just states that are outright prohibiting, Attorney General sending cease and desist letters? What's the status of that?
You know, like all forms of gaming, there's a patchwork of laws around the country. So, for example, in some states we offer all of our products. In some states we offer a limited form of our products. Here in the Commonwealth, we offer our best ball drafts and we offer our peer-to-peer contests, also known as our Champions Pick'em product.
Thank you.
Any other members? John, thank you very much for coming today and taking Chairman's prerogative real quick, because I know Virginia Equine Alliance has a pressing thing they got to get to today, and I really want the committee to hear their report today. So next up, I know we had a problem in responsible gambling, but if we can push Virginia Equine Alliance to present next, if you guys could come up, that'd be great.
We'll have Churchill follow, and then we'll finish up with the problem gambling. Debbie, thank you for coming. I know it's been long.
Should we wait for Senator Reeves or? Okay. Mr. Chairman and the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the potential reorganization of the Virginia Racing Commission. So my name is Jeb Hannum. I'm here with my colleague, Debbie Easter. I just wanted to start with a little bit of background about the Virginia Equine Alliance. The Equine Alliance is a nonprofit. We're a 501c6 organization. We're comprised of 4 member groups. So we represent the entirety of the racing and breeding industry in Virginia: the harness racing, flat racing, steeplechase racing, and the breeders. The VEA is unique. There's really no other organization like it in the United States. It was put together in 2014 and 2015 when racing in Virginia was at a very low point. The racetrack had been closed for a few years. The OTB network had been shut down, so there was just a trickle of revenue for the industry. And so the 4 groups that I mentioned realized that in order for there to be any future for Virginia racing, they had to speak in a unified way with one voice. So some changes were made to the Racing Act in 2015 that stabilized the industry, and then uniquely it gave the Racing Commission the ability to officially recognize an organization to be the body that represents racing. So that's what the VEA is. So we've been officially recognized by the Virginia Racing Commission as the organization to represent racing and breeding before the commission and the legislature. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that the VEA has carried out since 2015. I think as important as anything, we've been the cohesive voice for racing and breeding. That was, critically important when things were at a low point in 2014 and 15. We really helped the industry to communicate before the legislature, which went on to make important changes that have moved us forward, which I'm going to speak to in more detail. Specifically on an operational front, we reestablished the OTB network, which gave the industry much needed revenue. We helped broker the purchase of Colonial Downs. We helped the previous owners pass referendums, most notably in Dumfries. Legislatively, the VEA has been very active. We spearheaded the passage of House Bill 1609, which legalized the historical horse racing machines, and then has been the rebirth of Virginia racing. And then, importantly, in 2020, we were able to help ensure protections for the racing industry in the casino bill. Working with Peninsula Pacific, the previous owners of the track, and our new partners, Churchill Downs, we've helped to position Virginia as really one of the premier racing states in the Mid-Atlantic. And I think that, an example of that is the governor's announcement last week that there'll be a Kentucky Derby prep race at Colonial next spring, which, is fabulous and something that would have been unheard of just 10 years ago for us to think about something like that. On the breeding fund, we've increased funding in the Breeders' Fund, which we'll get to in more detail. We've established, and the VEA established, and we now pay for the residency program, which of all of our programs has probably been really one of the most successful in really helping to drive money down to regular horsemen all around the state. So thousands of horses have come into Virginia. Hundreds of farms have been affected and really helped to rebuild the equine network that had suffered so much 10 years ago when the industry was reeling. We rebuilt a harness track in Woodstock out at the Shenandoah County Fair, and now we operate the live racing there to this day, which we started in 2015. And on the steeplechase front, the racing over fences, Virginia Gold Cup, which is the premier day of racing over fences in Virginia, is one of the top venues in the country. And overall, Virginia is seen as the center for American jump racing. So I just wanted to point out some of those things that the VEA has helped to champion over the last few years. So I want to turn things over to my colleague, Debbie Easter, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the impact of the HHR money in the state.
Next slide.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, we do. Okay, thanks. Thank you, senators and delegates. We wanted to just talk about what HHR has done for the industry, the horse industry in Virginia. And I think that number one was the passage of HHR, and that what the legislature at that time knew that we needed to help the horse industry in Virginia, and it was important to Virginia's agricultural industry, which is the horse industry is a $2 billion industry here in Virginia. It supports about 30,000 jobs. Racing itself is about 542 million and over 5,000 jobs. And so far what's been happening is it's been working. As we go down the list, you can see that our purses have increased incredibly. And that's put us in national limelight. We're second on the East Coast in purses behind New York. And we're one of the very positive things that Virginia is one of the, as far as racing, is one of the very positive shining lights in racing in the whole nation right now. And we'd hate to see anything that happened to stop that. We talk about our residency program Jeb did for the standardbred and for the thoroughbred horses. One of the issues when racing stopped is our breeders' funds had become so minimalized, and compared to other states, we had no money to compete with these other breeding states. So we decided if we couldn't be the leading breeding states on the East Coast, maybe raising them would be the answer. And so we started the residency program. Over 5,000 horses, as Jeb said, have come into the state for the thoroughbred program. The 200 farms have been affected. They're part of this program. And the cumulative effect for the Commonwealth is $86.2 million economic impact when we've given out just about $14.6 million in bonuses. The purses for steeplechase and harness racing have raised considerably. We're going to have 72 days of racing next year, and that went from 0, as we remember, back in 2015 when the Colonial was shuttered. Harness racing has increased from 4 days to 28 days. Our breeders' funds have increased because of HHR, but we still are not competitive with the states around us. So we'd hate to see anything that would affect the HHR and that money coming towards those breeders' funds. I think the VEA...
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. I'd like to ask, what exactly is the Breeders' Fund?
So the Breeders' Fund are incentives that are set up by the state for people to incentivize people to breed horses, thoroughbreds, and standardbreds within the state. And those funds for us have been, up until last year, we paid out thoroughbred $2 million. Before it was $1 million. And we're competing with funds in New York of about 15 million, in Pennsylvania 10 million, and in Maryland about 5 million. And so we're still not competitive with the states around us yet.
Okay, and to follow up, I'm still not sure exactly, we're paying horse farmers to breed horses, or we're giving them an incentive? How does that work?
We do. We incentivize them by when their horses win races. We have a very unique program because we don't have year-round racing. Generally what happens in states is that when your horse wins a race in that state, the breeder would be incentivized. There's a fund that says, hey, you get a certain percentage of the purse money. We don't have year-round racing here in Virginia. So what's happened with our breeders' fund is we incentivize people if their horses run first, second, or third anywhere in North America. And it's that in this residency has really tried to build our program into more year-round programs, since I don't think we're ever going to have total year-round racing like other states.
Thank you.
Yeah, sir.
Senator, I've learned a little bit about this, and I'll give you more of a 101 that I think helps explain it. Yeah. But Debbie did a great job. But so what happens is, because we don't have the racing year-round, when our horses go to, let's say, West Virginia or Pennsylvania or someplace like that, and they come in first or second or third, they get like an extra bonus for their win. So they would get an extra $10,000 or $20,000 or something like that. Correct?
That would be part of the residency program. The horses that come here for at least 6 months and go out. The breeders program are actually for people that breed horses. There's another program that incentivizes them also.
Okay, so to be clear, the residency. So if you have those 5,000 horses that you talk about in number 3, those horses would be here at least 6 months out of the year, and that would let them qualify for these bonuses outside of Virginia, because we don't, as you say, we don't have the year-round track. And to be clear, and it is a unique thing, I think maybe West Virginia has something a little similar, but no other state that I'm aware of has that kind of bonus outside of the state. So of that $14 million or so dollars, it's all going outside of Virginia.
No, sir. We can only do it by the address that we send the 1099s to, but about 20% of those people winning those awards are Virginians. And we have to face it, Virginia, we started at 0 about 5 years ago. That's how many people could race here in Virginia. So I think that, that's going to continue to grow. But the beautiful thing about that program is it's saving our farms. One of the things that we've recognized as we've been rebuilding things is how the infrastructure in Virginia, our farms, the infrastructure that supports those farms has really diminished over the last few years. And that's why it's important. You've done such a good job of starting to grow these programs for us, and we're seeing growth. And we'd hate to see that stuff cut off, because we're not competitive yet. We want to see these farms keep on. My folks will tell me, and the economic impact study just reported that also. But they're hiring employees. They're doing new capital and projects, and they're being able to survive, and we weren't being able to survive before. And so that's real important.
Let me do Delegate Austin, then Delegate Bulova, then Delegate Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just reiterate what Deb has just said about the investment in agricultural properties in the valley. We've seen a tremendous amount of investment in horse farms and equipment sales and farm store sales, all related to the horse industry here in Virginia. And throughout the valley, we've seen so much development take place, but now we're seeing these farms preserved, and a mindset in the zoning change to protecting green space and farming. And to me, that's huge in Virginia, and I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One thing that I've always said in front of this body and the committees, it's hard to monetize, but one of the great things about Virginia and why people want to be here is because of the lifestyle. And agriculture, open spaces, all that is part of that, and we can't let that go away. That's real important. And these programs and the money that HHR is creating is a huge part of that, and you all recognize that back in 2019. So I'll just on the last 2 points. One of the things that's unique also about yes, sir.
Debbie, I think.
I'm sorry,
Bulova
Delegate
had a
Bulova.
question, then Delegate Creasy, and then I've got a question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to go back to something that you've said a couple of times. And so I know you've mentioned the importance of the investments, and that always seems to be followed by the state line. I hope that's not cut off. I guess in Guidehouse's presentation, I thought they made it relatively clear that current revenue sources and streams would be maintained, at least under the way that they had framed the consolidation at this point. And so is that really more just a reminder to make sure that we are true to that recommendation, or is there something else that you're alluding to? I just want to make sure that I'm not improperly reading between the lines.
So I think it's coming to Jeb's going to speak to it, but I'm happy to also. It seems that where the revenue source is taken away from horse racing, and that in other states, horse racing loses. And those what happens is it gets minimized, horse racing gets minimized because those, the commission is uniquely educated about our programs and how important horse racing is and the whole horse industry in Virginia. And what happens is that as you get, and this becomes more of a gaming commission issue, horse racing is expensive and we lose, and that's what's happened in other states, and we would hate to see that happen here.
And so would all of us, I would guess here on the dais. We don't want to see that. Look, to be clear, the regulatory part of it is what's going to be taken away, not the income producing part of it. So you would still be that would still be happening. It would still be going to the horse. Nothing would change. And I think there was a slide that mentioned that as well. In fact, there would be a real elevation of horse racing with a deputy commissioner, just for that. So I think it's we're doing a good job of making sure. I would just want to reassure you that that is not our intention at all, and we want to protect the industry. And we think what you're doing is important. And you talk about now 20% of Virginians that you're sending your 1099 to, and I hope in 2 years it'll be 40%. And I'm sure you do too, right? And you see that's the goal, and that's the direction this is taking, and that's important, and that's really what we care about as well.
So I'll go a little off my slide, but as we've just gotten to see your proposal today for the first time, I think one of the things I would question is looking at how the lottery gets to stay over here by itself. HHR, HISA regulations, all these things are all fairly new, and our commission is very, has knowledge and all that stuff. We've just hired maybe one of the best experts in the country to run the commission. And I would just say that maybe we should, what might be wrong with keeping the commission out here for a little while, just like you are with lottery, and let's see how that goes, just so that we don't see any effects, because it's happened all over the country when we move that revenue source away from racing. So, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Because we've had a lot of discussions about how many folds per year of thoroughbreds, and we used to do 1,000, and now we're down to less than 100. Does that have to do with item number 5, the 81% increase in Breeders' Fund?
I think that's going to help. We've seen a lot of things are happening. The industry is consolidating. We're not breeding as many horses nationally as we had in the past. I do think one of the things was, since we started this new payment of first, second, and third anywhere in North America, we're registering our mares now. It's too early for me to be able to tell you that I've got 500 foals being born, but I do think from 22 to now 24, we're going to see an increase of, it's not going to sound like a lot, but 50 foals, but on a percentage increase, that's going to be quite a bit. And I think we still have to catch up with the states around us as far as money-wise, but I think as we educate people around us, and it's hard to incentivize people to buy farms and breed horses. It's a long-term process, and it takes a long time to turn around. But we're a great state for that, and we're throwing a lot of money at it right now.
Well, thank you. And I would just comment along with my colleagues about one of the focuses is to keep HHR and the horse industry sustainable. And it's not just about race horses for us. It's about cutting horses. It's about trail horses. We're putting money to build some race horses here, but I would dare say that the Commonwealth could put some money towards all the other types of activities to which we use horses in the Commonwealth, right? Because that's a huge industry as well. But thank you for what you're doing, and I just want to reemphasize what Delegate Kriesik said. Part of this consolidation is not to take it. The main focus we're doing it is to put more emphasis on the actual horse racing, because we got enough companies that want to do slot machines and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So we want to maintain and ensure the viability and grow the horse industry in the Commonwealth of Virginia, right?
And thank you. And that's why I think the VEA is unique around the country, because not only do we throw money at the racing industry, but we've been very good about trying to get money for the other parts of the industry, and we'd like to see it grow also.
Right.
So thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to, before Debbie leaves, I just want to reiterate that HHR money is for the purpose of supporting live horse racing, and we're all 100% on board on that. So we're going to, don't worry. Right, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
So we're a tiny bit worried, Delegate Krizek. I'll elaborate on that. So I just wanted to show this side. We've obviously, the whole the committee has seen this many times, and this is what we're focused on, the potential reorganization of the Racing Commission. We heard the presentation from this morning. We've had an hour to digest it and think about it, and we look forward to taking a much deeper dive and understanding the recommendations in more detail. But having said that, there are some very significant concerns we have about the reorganization, and I would advocate, as Debbie alluded to a model where we keep things intact as they are, which is, I believe, recommendation 13 from the consultants that spoke earlier. I feel that this would be better for the bettors, which makes racing so unique. The betting ultimately pays for the racing. Keeping the Racing Commission fully intact, as it is in the top slide, will be better for horses, particularly horse safety, and better for the industry and agriculture. So let me sort of speak to that in a little bit more detail. So as Debbie mentioned,
All right, go ahead, Jeb.
So in looking at this, starting this part of the presentation, I just wanted to first of all acknowledge that when JLARC issued its report about the Racing Commission a few years ago, we took that very seriously, as I know the Racing Commission did as well. And some important changes have been made, most notably the hiring of Mogas Ahmed, who's here today, who I hope you all have the chance to meet in the coming weeks. He's going to be rolling out a comprehensive plan for changes to the Racing Commission, supported by the recommendations of the Spectrum Gaming. So at a very high level, this means staffing up with the technical roles that the Commission needs to properly oversee HHR. And I believe that was really the key issue that JLARC raised, was the lack of staffing and the technical expertise. And I know the new executive secretary is singularly focused on that, as well as establishing a new central IT system for licensing, monitoring, and auditing HHR.
Can I ask you, how is that staffing going? I know he's just been in 9 days or 10 days in the job, so it might be too early to ask. Have you got any staff that are just purely regulating the HHR machines at this point?
So I think that's probably best answered by the executive secretary. I know he has a plan that he's going to, implement and share with you all in detail. So I don't know if you want him to speak to that now or to speak to the committee members, offline. But that's
we can wait. We can wait. We've got a lot on our plate here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another very important thing that the Racing Commission does, and was not mentioned in the presentation by the consultants earlier today, was to implement the requirements of the new federal oversight of racing. So the biggest change that's happened to racing in the last 50 years is the establishment of HISA, which is a Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. So for the first time ever, the federal government has oversight on a number of safety issues, specifically track safety, and then also on drug testing. So right now, prior to HISA, every state managed things individually. And I think the HISA formation, I think, is the best thing that's happened to racing, and is a much needed reform. Already, just in a few years, HISA was established in 2020. Just in a few years, we're starting to see fatalities fall nationally. We're seeing some of the, really the bad apples in racing get meaningful suspensions and get kicked out of the game. And we're seeing uniformity and new standards, heightened standards for drug testing. And this is a critical component of what the commission is doing now and will need to do going forward. So I'd ask the committee to keep that in mind. The third point, licensee accountability. Debbie alluded to this. We feel very strongly that the Equine Alliance that HHR, which is the main economic driver of racing now, which has transformed the industry, and which we saw that in an earlier slide, that needs to remain linked to racing. When you pull away the revenue source from racing, we've seen in other states the model collapse. There's a term called decoupling, where states will allow the gaming to continue, but then they let the racing shut down, and that's not something that's theoretical. It's happened. So HHR is driving the rejuvenation of racing in Virginia, and we feel it's critically important that remain under the Racing Commission going forward. We need to keep that link, and we need to hold the licensee accountable to the high standards that we have in Virginia. We've been very lucky. Peninsula Pacific was a very good and responsible racing company. We have nationally recognized Churchill Downs, which has been great to work with them, and they're doing very good things in Virginia. But we still need to have a regulatory ability for that high standard to be maintained, and we feel that keeping HHR and the Commission is a critical component of that. My fifth point about responsible gaming, the new Commission will be working obviously to make sure that right programs are in place for people that want to put themselves on a restricted list, but ultimately maintaining racing under the Department of Agriculture as it is, we feel is in the best interest of racing now and going forward. Yep.
Just for the committee, when we talk about the accountability to industry stakeholders, when you take away the money from the commission and put it to the gaming commission, if Churchill...
Debbie, can you come to the podium, please? Because there's people watching on video.
Just for example, as Jeb said, standards. We want the people that are running racing. There's a whole community that lives on the backside. If the infrastructure licensee is not living up to their obligation to take manure off the backside, take trash off, or in a Rosie's gaming, if they're not replacing the carpets that have become worn, we need to have a commission that's there and that can move quickly and the way, if you take away their stick to say, we're taking away your money, your HHR, till you do these things right. I think that potentially, I don't know that we answered that in the presentation that we had, but maybe we did and I missed it.
So I just want to reiterate, the next 18 to 24 months for the industry, are going to be critical. We're going to see the state law allows 5,000 HHR machines. We're going to be getting close to that point within the next 2 years. By law, you have to have 1 day of racing for every 100 machines that are in operation. So we're going to go from 27 days this year to 50 within the next 2 years. So we're going to see a huge growth in the industry and at the HHR level. We have a nationally renowned executive secretary who's an expert in HHR regulation. We feel it'll be very detrimental to the industry to break apart that model and then put it back together again in a different place. So again, our request from the committee is to consider recommendation 13 of the consultants to put on hold any change to the Racing Commission for at least 5 years and look at the Racing Commission like you're going to look at lottery after this new commission has been set up. So thank you.
Thank you all for letting us talk.
Okay, next we're going to have the problem responsible gambling.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on. Churchill Downs. Oh.
Sorry, I'm being told by my vice chairman.
We're saving the best for last.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Aaron Palmer. Director of Government Relations for Churchill Downs here in Virginia, and really appreciate your time this afternoon. Very quickly, we bought the Colonial Downs assets in late 2022, and just very brief overview of our company. We own and operate close to 30 racing and gaming facilities across 14 states. We're particularly known for the iconic Kentucky Derby. Horse racing and the Derby is the heartbeat of our company, and you're going to hear more about our racing operations and how HHR goes into making this a successful and bolstering industry. Specifically in Virginia, Churchill's invested more than $500 million over the last year and a half since acquisition of the Colonial Downs assets. Across Virginia, we employ 1,400 team members with $30 million in annual salaries. During racing season, we employ an additional 500 employees, bringing our total to about 2,000 employees across Virginia. We pay about $54 million in annual state and local tax revenue, and then $750,000 in annual charitable contributions. Each Rosie's facility has a pretty robust budget, and we strive to be good community partners wherever we're at. Specifically at Colonial Downs, the first thing we did when we acquired Colonial Downs in late 2022 was we moved 3 highly prestigious graded stakes races to Virginia: the Beverly D, the Secretariat, and the Arlington Million. Those races were ran last year for the first time in Virginia, which led to record race days, races, tickets sold, horses in competition, and handle. Part of that was also moving the racing schedule from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, as it used to be Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday prior to us moving to Virginia. I look forward to briefing you all on this racing season once we conclude after the Virginia Derby, but our plans for the future in 2025 we'll be racing 48 days, nearly doubling our racing from this year. And as many as you probably saw the announcement last week, the road to the Kentucky Derby now runs through Virginia. Next year we will have a Festival of Spring Racing in March. We will have a pre-qualifying Oaks and Derby race. We're saying win and you're in. So we're really trying to put Virginia even more on the map. Virginia has a rich equine history, and we are just building upon that. And we look forward to continuing to grow the industry here in Virginia. And very quickly, we also own and operate Rosie's Gaming Emporiums. We have 7 properties around the state. We will be opening a facility late next month in Dumfries, where is initially about a $400 million investment, and we will open with about 1,600 HHR machines, which, as you will hear from my colleagues here today, those 1,600 games is what adds to our racing season next year. That'll be approximately 16 days added of racing. So you will find today that HHR and horse racing, it's not just about the gaming industry, but it's also bolstering and rejuvenating a whole nother industry, the equine industry. And with me today is VP of Racing Gary Palmasino and Senior VP of Government Relations Patrick Neely. I'm going to bring a VP of Racing Gary Palmasino up here to talk more about the intricacies of live horse racing and all that goes
Aaron,
into
can I interrupt you? I think Delegate Creasy has a question for you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talked about the new races, the Arlington Million, the Secretariat, what's that other one?
Beverly D.
Beverly D. I think that was named after the owner of that Chicago track, the Arlington track, way back when, right? Mm-hmm. So right now we're you had a bad luck this last time, and I was planning to go there, but we had the storm, Debbie, who moved not to be confused, not Debbie Easter, yeah. Right? But the tropical storm that pushed you to Sunday, and I'm sure the handle went down. How is the handle going on those races? And also, can you talk a little bit more about the Virginia Derby? It's going to be moving now. I mean, the exciting thing is it's going to be a part of that. I guess it gives 50 points towards the Kentucky Derby, and we'll have the opportunity to be a player in that process, which is exciting. But there are a lot of tracks that do that, but this is the first time for Virginia, and that's a testament to you all for doing that. Congratulations. But it is going to be changing that from traditionally we've had it's been a turf race. Right now it's going to be a dirt race, and it's going to be in the spring and not in the summer. How is that how do you anticipate that handle to be? And also, has the handle been going down? I think was like 6 million this last week or this past month for it, maybe 9 million last year. Is that something to be worried about?
Well, we certainly had to move some races this season due to weather, and that's certainly what we're going to get into. And I appreciate you all acknowledging that live horse racing should remain at the VRC because we have to be nimble and when weather occurs. But I'm going to let Gary speak more to the handle and kind of projections on those races. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you all, committee members, and sort of to dive right in on your sort of questions and points. Spot on your assessment of the movement of the million. The Arlington Million is a Grade 1 race. It's one of the most prestigious turf races in America. Beverly D and the Secretariat Grade 2 races. $500,000 for those two and $1 million for the million. We had a horse fly here from Europe to compete in the Arlington Million. We had the winning horse was owned by the ruler of Dubai. The trainer of that horse is the most prominent trainer in England. So we had a lot of international participation in the million. When we saw Tropical Storm Debbie coming through, what we wanted to make sure was that the conditions of the course was fair and equitable for all the horses, but we also wanted to maintain the fact that these horses and these jockeys had all flown from overseas or from Canada or from Kentucky or California. So it made the difficult decision to move the races to Sunday, and I do think it impacted handle. I think naturally there's more horse players out there on a Saturday afternoon. To your point, last year we did $10 million on Arlington Million Day. Slightly disappointed in the 6.2 million on Sunday, but I think what we gained was appreciation from the horsemen of being nimble and trying to make sure that the conditions of the race was as fair as possible. We had no idea what Debbie was ultimately going to bring in the sense of rainfall over that region. We wanted to maintain a safe turf course. We also had 11 other races that day, so what we didn't want to see was other races come off of the turf and 3-horse fields, and that isn't the product that we wanted to put on for that particular day of racing. So as far as handle overall at the current meet, weather challenges have been difficult. We had to cancel one day of racing because of the significant rainfall right around opening weekend, around the 12th of July. We had to cancel a half a day of racing because of lightning. We had a thunderstorm that sort of sat over the top of us for over an hour. And once you get an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes behind schedule, the horses, it just doesn't really work. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for us. We haven't really built up a lot of momentum because we've canceled days and canceled races. We've added a race day closing weekend. We're hoping to try to end on a positive note. As you all know, the Virginia Derby is September 7th. This year's running of the Virginia Derby being September 7th. As we talk about next year's Virginia Derby, it's all been, well documented here that we're going to grow racing. We have to add racing dates. So as we looked at the racing calendar, it was, where can we grow? Where can we expand? And that idea of the spring festival of racing and having a Kentucky Derby prep race here is something that our leadership team was extremely excited about. We have a lot of operational challenges to overcome to pull that off, but it's something that is priority number one for us in offering a pathway to the Kentucky Derby right here through Virginia. And that's a spring meet that we can expand. If racing and racing operations and race dates grow here, maybe that's a 2 or 3 week meet and sort of a boutique festival that sort of kicks off summer. So all the cards are on the table, but to answer your question, the Kentucky Derby and how you qualify, there's 20 horses in the starting gate. There's 20,000 horses born every year, so you get one shot at it in your 3-year-old season. And in order to whittle that full crop down to the 20 horses entering the starting gate, there's a series of qualifying races around the country, and you have to earn points in order to climb up the leaderboard. And 1 through 20 are the 20 horses that make the starting gate. There are 6 races around the country that offer 100 points to the winner, and there's 8 or 10 that offer 50 points to the winner. So in a typical year, 25 to 30 points is what gets you in the gate. So the winner of next year's Virginia Derby will earn 50 points. So all but assured a win and you're in. And of course, the horse has to stay healthy and get to the race itself. But I think the other thing we're excited about in that particular date that we chose, we were very conscientious of that date. There's no other Kentucky Derby prep that weekend. So Virginia will be the focus. As you get into February and March, there's the Louisiana Derby, the Florida Derby, and all these races that happen. And the particular date of March 15th of next year, there is not another Kentucky Derby prep anywhere in the country. So you should see the best jockeys, the best trainers, and we're going to have to go recruit the best horses. But we wanted to try to fill the void in that calendar to really put the spotlight on Virginia in that particular race. Does that answer your question?
Chairman, just for the general public and everybody that's watching, keep your calendars open March 15th next year.
That's it.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Virginia
that plug. Look, in the interest of time and not being super repetitive, I think everyone is well aware of kind of the economic impact of the industry. I think Debbie and Jeb made that well clear. I do appreciate Guidehouse's thoughts about the specialized regulators and the specialized approach of a racing commission. I think what I wanted to do was talk about a couple of things that I heard throughout their presentation that might be potential unintended consequences. I think Delegate Bobo, you sort of went down that path of two bosses and just trying to make sure there's some understanding, in particular for Guidehouse, of how linked the parimutuel aspect is to the regulatory aspect of a general race date. So a couple of examples, a new wager type. If we wanted to develop the ultimate Virginia pick 10 and you had to pick all 10 winners for some, big jackpot pool, we would present that to the Virginia Racing Commission traditionally for their approval, and they would go through parimutuel regulations and make sure that it fits within the standard of an acceptable wager. So a little concerning as to sort of, while that is a live racing function, it's also very parimutually linked. And I think things like a veterinarian scratch. So a Virginia Racing Commission employee, veterinarian, is going to, in the interest of equine health and safety, assess the field before every single race. And if there's a horse that they feel like is not fit to compete, they'll scratch that horse. Well, that has distinct parimutuel implications, as there's refunded money, there's pools that get reallocated because of the scratched horse. And I think the other thing to think about is the licensing aspect. As I looked at the chart, it's obvious that sort of licensing may move out of a racing commission guidance. And one of the things that the stewards do daily is if a person on the grounds is undesirable or a trainer has a positive test, they would rescind that license as part of their regulatory oversight of live racing. So just want to sort of point out a few potential pitfalls and keep the conversation going around just that link between the parimutuel nature of the game and the regulatory oversight of the Racing Commission. And then moving on to the next slide, I think the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act was documented by Jeb, but another federal sort of layer is the Interstate Horse Racing and Wagering Act of 1978. And what that does is it ties the live racing to your ability to simulcast across state lines. So when we think about our ability as the racetrack to disseminate our signal to ADWs around the country, to other racetracks around the country, it's tied to our live racing contract, both with the approval of the Virginia Horse Racing Commission and our horsemen's groups. So I want to try to think through that sort of federal layer as that is the link between simulcasting and ADW and the revenues that come in from wagering and the live racing contract that we have to abide through or live under with our horsemen and our regulator. So that's just another federal layer to be thoughtful and mindful of. And I think this was documented a bit earlier, but just the nimbleness and availability of the commissions. I remember on the night of August 2nd, calling Chairwoman Nixon at 8 o'clock at night to tell her that we've been under a delay. We have lightning in the area. We need to cancel racing. And as the approver of our race dates, we need commission blessing to just up and call it a day. So I think we need some certainty and some clear direction on who to sort of work through in that environment. And that, of course, has parimutuel implications as well, as we refund money or we cancel bets and things of that nature. And then I think the other thing is just making sure that the commission has the ability to defend the integrity of the sport. I outlined two potential or two past litigation challenges, Baffert versus the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, which was well documented in the news, and Jamgachian versus the Indiana Horse Racing Commission, where licensees challenged the rules of the commission and of the racing authority. And in both of those instances, the commission had to sort of defend themselves. And I just would want a sort of clear understanding of who that would be, how that would work. And I think it's important that the folks that are sort of defending that understand the issues, in particular, Jamgachian versus Indiana was a very specific claiming rule that he was challenging. And it took a commission or a staff of people that knew the nuanced claiming rules as an example in order to defend that. And the Baffert case was a drug overage, and the commission had to decide to take on that challenge and defend their integrity as the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission for flagging a positive test, and just want to understand or be certain that that integrity is defendable and that the folks that are going to be doing it in the future maintain that set of standards. So with that, unless there are any questions on that front, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thanks for having us today. My name is Patrick Neely. I'm head of government affairs for Churchill Downs. Prior to that, I was a co-founder and president of Exacta Systems, which is the largest historic horse racing system provider in the country. And I want to talk more about historic horse racing. We've kind of heard about it a little bit, but I want you guys to understand and think about the requirements and the specialized expertise that is required to regulate historic horse racing and why it differs from traditional gaming. First and foremost, a slot machine, if you rolled a slot machine into this room today, plugged it into the wall and turned it on, it would work. The player would be playing against the house, the casino. It's relatively straightforward. It's a machine that you turn on. It's electronic. You plug it in, off it goes. If we rolled a historic horse racing machine into this room today and plugged it in, nothing would happen. It would be a dark screen. It wouldn't work. And the reason is, a historic horse racing machine relies on a complex pari-mutuel wagering system running on the back end to make it work. So there are two key components to historic horse racing. Number one, it's a pari-mutuel wager. It's got to be pari-mutuel, and it's got to be number two on the outcome of a horse race. And so traditionally, in all states that we're operating in, a racing commissioner made up of experts in pari-mutuel wagering on horse racing are the determining factor on whether a new wager, a new HHR game meets these criteria. And so, number one, on a horse race, how does it work? Well, we have a database of roughly 100,000 historic horse races. It's provided by a company called Equibase. This is the thoroughbred racing and breeding industry's kind of data repository. So they collect all of the data for the industry and the sport. It feeds the system. The commissioners, the regulators have to look at our database. They have to compare it with Equibase, and they have to make sure that it meets certain regulatory criteria. No scratches in the race, for example. All the horses had to finish. No disqualifications. So a regulatory component there specific to horse racing, live horse racing. What are the types of wagers? One of our wagers is called a triple trifecta. It's based on an Association of Racing Commissioners International Model Rule. So the commissioners with expertise in this area have to look and see, all right, does this match up with what the specific criteria for this particular wager? Does it fit the bill? If not, we can't offer the bet. Is pari-mutuel accounting taken care of? How is takeout calculated? How is breakage calculated? How are those things calculated, and how much money is returned to the pari-mutuel pool to be redistributed to the players? All of these are specific to pari-mutuel wagering. All of these concepts would be foreign to a traditional gaming regulator who is, again, regulating slot machines, table games, nothing of the sorts of wagers on live racing, nothing of the sorts of pari-mutuel wagering, particularly on horse racing. And so that's on the front end. On the back end, you have enforcement and compliance. And so every day, our historic horse racing system generates reams of reports. They are pari-mutuel reports that go to the regulators. They also go to the Thoroughbred Racing Protective Bureau. Just like live wagering, just like simulcast wagering, just like ADW. All of those reports, those pari-mutuel reports are generated. They go to the regulator. They go to the TRPB for audits to make sure that everything matches up. So, as you can see, live racing, simulcast, off-track, ADW, historic horse racing, they're all interwoven. They're part of the same fabric. And so I think the suggestion that you could start ripping out parts of that fabric and putting some of it over here and some of it over here could be seriously problematic. Right now it is one functioning ecosystem, And if you start carving up that ecosystem and putting things in different spots, it's going to be difficult for that fabric to stay together and for us to effectively run and, quite frankly, regulate live, simulcast, OTB, ATW, ADW, and historic horse racing. So that, I think, is kind of problem number one. Problem number two, and I've worked with racing and gaming regulators across the country for the last 20 years, and the reality is, in jurisdictions that have combined oversight, I think they probably all went into it with the best of intentions. Hey, we're going to make sure that all stakeholders are protected here. The reality is that doesn't happen. By way of politics or geography or money or whatever else, typically an industry will come to dominate. And so I think Michigan is a good example, kind of a cautionary tale for this body. So the state of Michigan at one time was a thriving racing and breeding state. They introduced casino gaming in the 90s, and the decision in the name of efficiency and everything else was to combine the two, a racing commission and the gaming commission, under one board. So in 2003, there were 7 racetracks in Michigan. They ran over 1,000 races, $9 million in purses. 375 thoroughbreds were foaled in the state of Michigan in 2003. In the last 20 years, every one of those racetracks has closed. The last racetrack to close was Northville Downs in 2024, last year. In 2022, 4 thoroughbreds were foaled in the state of Michigan. It has gone from thriving to dead in 20 years. And I will tell this committee that it should be noted that in that 20-year time period, not a single casino closed in the state of Michigan. Quite the contrary. The casino industry in Michigan is thriving, booming. Both are regulated by the same entity. And again, I would suggest that you kind of dig into what's happened in Michigan and how they interacted with each other, how the casino industry and the racing industry interacted with each other under a joint regulator, and if one particular industry was favored by that regulator or not. Again, I think the results speak pretty loudly. One industry is doing extraordinarily well.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Yes, please.
Did Churchill Downs have any investments in any of the casinos?
In Michigan?
Yeah.
We do not.
None. Okay.
None. We don't have any investments in Michigan at all. So I think, again, I would encourage this committee to think about the unintended consequences, that one regulatory authority would ultimately end up picking winners and losers. If one industry came with an innovation, as Gary said, well, we've got a new bet that we want to try out. Another industry that's regulated by the same group could say, that's a little close. That's kind of competitive. We're against that. And then internal friction. And who wins that fight? Again, in every jurisdiction that I'm familiar with, an industry typically will come out on top. Maybe it'll be the racing industry. Maybe we'll be the kings of the, but I don't think that any of us want to take that chance. I think all of us want to make sure that we are set up for success. And so I'll close with this. This legislative body made a policy decision in 2019 that has been a runaway success. Historic horse racing is fueling live racing in Virginia, we just heard about. We're doubling race dates. The road to the Kentucky Derby goes through Virginia. Churchill Downs is looking to make significant extra investments in this state. You guys have a huge success story on your hands, and I would suggest that you think very carefully before doing anything that could alter that. I was looking at the consultant's study, and they set it up on the front page by saying, setting up the Virginia Gaming Commission for success. And I would suggest that your threshold question, the ultimate question, should be, how do we set up the $2 billion equine industry for success? And so with that, I'll take any questions. And
Delegate Kresick, then Senator Evan.
Yeah, Senator, you want to go first, and then I'll follow up because I've got a bunch of questions.
Thanks. Mr. Is it Neely?
Neely. Mm-hmm.
Healy.
Neely.
Neely, I got it right the first time. Okay. Mr. Neely, you skipped over slide number 7 about how when we grow the Rosies, it leads to more race days in Virginia. I guess it's 100 machines for each race day.
That's correct.
And then in 2025, we're going to have 27-day racing system, or 48-day racing season in 2025.
Correct.
What I wanted to ask was, remind us how the statute allows for more machines to come forward in the future.
We are currently limited to 5,000 machines across the Commonwealth.
So you would need the General Assembly to authorize more local referendums.
That's correct, or to raise the cap.
If you were going to do that. Okay.
That's correct. So we're capped at 5,000. So if the legislature deemed expansion was in its best interest, and we would certainly be supportive of that, then yes, the statutory language would be needed to be amended to allow for an additional 2,500, even without new referendums. So existing locations could potentially grow under that circumstance.
Thank you.
I got a couple comments and a couple questions, but if the chairman will indulge me. Yeah. First, I want to make it clear that it's the General Assembly and not the industry that has been the driver for more race days. We are very supportive of the equine industry and more racing days. In fact, the chairman and I put in a bill a couple of years ago, I think it was, to tie the machines, as Senator Eben mentioned, the 100-to-1 ratio, so that you would have, with the new machines, when you get to 5,000, you would have to have 50 days of racing. Prior to that, it was just the first, I think, 2,000 or 2,500, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows, but machines and were tied. And then after that, you didn't have to add any extra race days. So it's only, and you could add, you don't have to wait for, you could add more race days right now. You could divide up some of those purses maybe and get a little bit, maybe get some more race days. We're not trying to stop you from doing that. We support that effort, and that is something that I want the record to be clear that the General Assembly is the driver behind that, not the industry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that's absolutely true. As I said, the policy decisions that you guys made has made all of this possible.
I also want to make it clear that this process has been going on for a while, and it is a little bit. I mean, you've had opportunities to talk to Guidehouse. They've been very. You heard in the beginning, and I appreciate you bringing all this to us now. This is great, but this is not the first time this is being considered. We have all of this has been part of the calculus. So I think a little bit of this is we're handling this, and we're not hurting this is not to hurt the equine industry. We're not Michigan. We're doing this right. We're taking our time. We're standing up an agency that's going to be fair and safe and protect not just the gaming industry, but the consumers and the Virginians. That's really the bottom line. That's what our real focus is on. I also want to say that you guys wanted to have a casino. Remember, Colonial Downs. If the referendum had passed, you would have a casino here. So don't act like the casinos are the bad guys necessarily. When you're in that same industry as the chairman was kind of alluding to as well. Now you mentioned breakage. I've long wondered about breakage. I noticed that in Kentucky you have penny breakage, but here you have dime breakage. So that means that the bettors, the consumers, are paying more or getting less of a return. Have you thought about making the breakage similar in Virginia as it is in Kentucky?
I think we would like that. In most states, breakage is set by statute. And so that required a statutory change in Kentucky. I think it was 5 cents in Kentucky prior to the statutory change to take it down to a penny. So I think we would be supportive of that change. Absolutely.
All right, let the record show that. Okay, thank you. You'll see that bill come through in January.
And if I may respond to a couple of your previous points. No, I'm not saying that the casino industry are the bad guys. What I'm saying is that a racing industry and a casino industry might not see eye to eye on certain things like innovation, new facility approvals, et cetera. And so it naturally sets up a conflict between the two. Not that one is good and one is bad, but that they are going to be competing. And so if there is a single regulatory agency over both, and one industry says, hey, we want to do A, and the other industry says A sounds terrible to us, then the one single agency is going to have to decide who are we with here? And so the question is, are they more often with one industry over another industry? And so that's what we've seen in other jurisdictions, and that's our concern.
Right now, there's a lot of new gaming coming. I would worry about the new stuff that's trying to enter the field. And I think the agency we're trying to stand up will be a bulwark against that expansion. At least will give us the information that we need. And also, here's a situation. You've got 3 regulatory bodies dealing with one kind of gambling right now. For example, if I want to put $500 into my sports betting account, and I can bet on sports betting, or I can bet on the sports betting apps has a fantasy sister app. I can do it there, or I can go to their sister like TVG kind of racetrack app. I can bet right now on a track in Ireland. They're probably racing right now in the evening, right?
Yeah, probably.
It's probably about right now, right? So as soon as we leave, we'll all go bet on the Irish racetrack. And so that's one app, if you will, and we have 3 different agencies. The racing is Department of Agriculture. The lotteries handling the sports, and Department of Agriculture is handling the fantasy. Racing is handled by the VRC, and we have the lottery handling the sports betting. That's what we're talking about, is putting all of that together in one place so that we can have it all under one roof. So we appreciate your concerns. We're addressing your concerns. Your concerns have been heard, and so I think a little bit of it's much ado about nothing, but you're the experts certainly in this field, but we're not trying to pick winners and losers. What we're trying to do is the winner we want is the general public in Virginia. So I appreciate you. Thank you very much, Mr. Neely.
Sure. No other questions?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And last but not least, the best practices in problem and responsible gambling policy. No, that's fine. Good. All right. Very good. Very good.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, thank you so much for having me today. I'm reading the room. I can just take questions and not go through the presentation, but I do appreciate the opportunity today. By way of introduction, my name is Brianne Dora Shawal. I am CEO and founder of a problem and responsible gaming firm based in Fairfax and a proud graduate of the University of Mary Washington. But by further way of introduction, I began my work in problem and responsible gaming policy 11 years ago in my home state of Massachusetts, where at the time we were standing up the very first gaming commission in the state, and I served as an advisor on matters relating to responsible gaming for that commission. In 2018, a little thing called PAFSFA happened. At that time, I came down to DC and served as the first ever legislative director for the National Council on Problem Gambling. To date, my work has spanned over 46 states in more than 24 countries, and I've served both legislative bodies, regulatory agencies, as well as industry stakeholders. My views on gambling are very clear. I am neutral on legalized gambling. My interest is to serve in my best way possible to aggregate all the information we have to mitigate risk and to reduce harm that is inevitable from gaming. Currently, across the United States, we are seeing a huge evolution in gambling and the offerings, with 40 jurisdictions now offering some type of sports betting. 30 of those have some form of sports betting in an online modality. From a problem gambling aspect, I care about this. We know that there is an increased risk of gambling-related harm through the type of gambling. More on that later. We have 8 states that have legalized iGaming, or as I affectionately call it, a slot machine in your pocket. 48 jurisdictions have a lottery, and 23 states, as Josh Kirshner alluded to earlier, that offer daily fantasy sports. But to why I'm here today to talk to you, there have never been in our nation's history so many proposals, both from legislative bodies as well as regulatory agencies, to address the harm that is seemingly becoming very apparent as a result of these robust gambling offerings. So I decided to pick a few headlines. I thought they were eye-catching. New York, one of the biggest gambling markets, just recently passed a new bill allocating 1% of their revenues to address gambling addiction. They previously had allocated $6 million a year, and it wasn't sufficient. A gambling regulator right now in Ohio is looking at what needs to be done as it relates to promotions and ads and the implications on vulnerable and within the communities. New Jersey, one of the most forward-thinking regulators that the United States has, recently launched a program requiring all of its licensees to track on the back end of their systems individuals that might be showing signs of problematic play, mandating and streamlining interventions that would be required by all operators. So what is problem gambling? I won't go into all of the specifics, as I know you've been briefed by both Ann Rogers as well as Carolyn Hawley here in the state. But the reality is problem gambling is not just a personal problem. It's a family problem, it's a community problem, it's a state problem. One individual that struggles with gambling-related harm negatively impacts 8 to 10 other individuals. And I've done some math later on in the presentation, estimating what those social costs are being incurred by the state for neglecting to address this and fund it properly. It is thought that about 5% of people who actively gamble will suffer from problematic gambling at some time. And there are some biological, psychological, and sociological factors that feed into this. Given that the Commonwealth has traditionally done nothing to address this public health issue, I'm very concerned about the current state of problem gambling within our jurisdiction. Annually, it's thought to be about $14 billion in social costs to address this public health issue. I think it's very important to note here that the federal government in no way recognizes, funds, or supports this addiction, leaving all of the obligation to fall upon you as a state. The National Council on Problem Gambling conservatively estimates that 9 million American adults suffer from gambling addiction. However, I'd like it to stand for the record that this is likely very low, as the shame and stigma associated with gambling addiction is the highest of all the addictions. I think this is most apparent in the suicide rates that are often associated with this disorder. It is 15 times the rate than the general population. The prevalence rate, I think, is really important. I think I was asked by this committee to give some advice and guidance on what kind of funding is needed to address this issue. However, the sad reality is the state has never invested in an adequate prevalence study to really understand how deeply penetrative this is in our communities. It is thought to be about roughly 2% of Virginia's population, but again, that's an estimate. When states have taken the initiative to actually invest in understanding this, they have found, in fact, actually, that it was not 1 to 2% as previously speculated. Most recently, Illinois found that 3.8% of their population is struggling. Now, the next example is one that's often jarring. We think of 2 states in particular as the herald of gambling, the ecosystem that we should all aspire to be, Nevada and New Jersey. But what if I told you the gaming capital of the world is considered one of the most gambling addicted states? In fact, actually, they have 3 times the rate of gambling addiction. 6% of the population is actively struggling. And it has been the regulator, in conjunction with Rutgers University, as well as the health agency, that is taking significant steps to address this issue, as it is causing significant harm across the state. Connecticut most recently published another jarring report. This is why it's so important that research be a consideration. Connecticut recently authorized both sports betting and iGaming. Staggeringly, we learned that about 71% of revenue is coming from fewer than 7% of the population, 1.8% of them having active gambling addiction tendencies, and another 4.9% being at risk. This really comes into question what kind of regulations are needed to balance the way the businesses are being structured and deployed in our communities.
I think that needs to be repeated. 71% of all legal gambling revenue in the state of Connecticut comes from fewer than 7% of residents.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
1.8% of them being in the active throes of an addiction and 4.9% being at risk. There's a wonderful survey that was conducted by the National Council on Problem Gambling. It examined the behaviors and attitudes around gambling experiences. For full disclosure, this was really aiming to have a better appreciation of sports betting and fantasy, as those are the most current of interest topics. But nonetheless, I think two things were derived that are important here. Past year, problematic gambling activity among sports bettors was twice the rate in problematic play than that of other gamblers. So we're not talking about tendencies compared to non-gamblers. We're talking about the fact that these are new individuals, right? Sports betting is still relatively new, that are engaging in twice the rate of problematic play from other forms of gambling.
And is that mostly male?
It is. There are, of course, females that engage in sports betting, but really I'm most worried about the male 18 to 24-year-old demographic in particular. The other thing that this survey highlighted is that there does seem to be a renewed interest that the government should be doing more to help people with a gambling addiction. So what are we doing? Not a lot, I'll be honest. The average per capita investment is about 54 cents across the US. There are still 8 jurisdictions that contribute $0 to address this public health issue. Only 2 of those 8 don't have any form of legal gambling. As of the last survey, you rank 27th of the jurisdictions that do put any investment into this, and your per capita spend is 20 cents. I think more shockingly was when I went and did your estimate for the annual social cost, me as a taxpayer, are incurring because we are not funding this sufficiently. Per year, a rough estimate is $350 million to the state of Virginia for not putting in sufficient funds to research, prevent, and treat this public health issue. $350 million.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask if you could elaborate the $358 million in societal costs.
Yeah. Sure. How?
Break that down a little bit.
Divorce, bankruptcy, crime, healthcare, to my point about suicidal ideations, depression, anxiety. We're talking about individuals who are in the throes of an addiction that often compromises their finances. I don't want to be misleading in any way. You can have a gambling problem and be able to pay your bills. I think of the likes of Phil Mickelson, for instance, right? He was very transparent most recently, saying that when he decided to give up gambling, his relationships were deepened and improved. But nonetheless, for the majority of people I represent, financial considerations are to be taken into account, and many don't have access to proper resources and turn to the state. Just to juxtapose this to other addictions, I love this data point. Substance abuse is 338 times more funded than that of problem gambling, yet it only is 7 times more prevalent within our community. So we're talking about something that is pretty rampant, yet doesn't have nearly the funds that it needs. A recent survey came out from, it's called NAIDIGS. It's a nonprofit. They're a group of individuals that serve at the pleasure of the governments to oversee problem gambling services. So Miss Ann Rogers is a member of this group. She actually serves on the board. And every few years, they distribute this survey, which I'd be happy to provide in totality. It's very lengthy. And it breaks down on a state-by-state basis how monies are allocated and spent, and also what's happening as it relates to problem gambling services. I found Virginia, it's not great, somewhere in the middle there. The average is $3.1 million in contributions, and as of 2023, you contributed the most ever you have as a state at $2 million. As you can see, Kentucky is all the way at the end with nothing to date. But Massachusetts, which is leading across the US at over $22 million. And I'd be happy to elaborate what you get for $22 million versus nothing, but I think the point stands, the variances are pretty stark. For a point of reference, we have seen states that have recently increased the type of gambling offerings they have also tie in an increase for problem gambling, Tennessee, New York, and Massachusetts leading the way. The reason for this is the legislation often mandates a certain percentage of revenues to go into problem gambling funding, whereas things stand right now, you only have sports betting contributing anything at 2.5%. And as I'm sure it was noted earlier to this committee, there was an issue initially because there had been some carve-outs for promotional deductions that resulted in funds being far fewer than we anticipated at the time we were legalizing sports betting for responsible gaming. For planning purposes and to give you a national glimpse, this is how the majority of states allocate the dollars. It's not just important to have the dollars, it's how you spend them, right? And how you measure the success. And we see a whole lot of variances from prevention and public awareness to evaluation, research, and treatment. Now, I did find something that I thought would be important to note here. It came to the attention of Executive Director of the National Council on Problem Gambling, Keith White's attention, that Virginia currently is disproportionately allocating dollars to prevention instead of treatment as others, which, being responsive to the findings of research should dictate how dollars are used. But then I found this data point. It appears as though there is a significant number of calls coming into two different helplines as you choose to use a state-specific helpline and not the national number. And while the Virginia-specific helpline calls are jarring as it is at 967 this year alone, when you put that in addition to the national helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER, we're looking at close to 4,500 calls, texts, and chats from January 1st to present day. I also had it pulled, the data point for how many calls were received to the national number from authorizing sports betting, and 26,519 residents of Virginia called for help. To say we might need more money for treatment might be an understatement.
Chairman, I know this might be impossible to calculate, but
oh dear,
I know. I'm just wondering.
Political science, not math,
for all the
sir.
people, for everybody that calls, there must be many more that are, you mentioned stigma and things like that won't call. And I would assume sometimes some of these calls are from family members or friends. Do you see that? Is there any way to calculate that? Because we may be talking about a kind of an undercount of thousands.
Absolutely. The first way to account for that is to have a research agenda. In Massachusetts, as part of the statute and the mandate for standing up the Gaming Commission was to have an annual research agenda. They tied it into a local university so they could go out within the communities, experts, and find out how pervasive is this? How can we reach the population that's not comfortable calling? Chairman, to your earlier question about who is this? Well, when I think of the average male around 18 to 24, they're not calling a national helpline. They want to text or chat the way that they're gambling. There are so many opportunities by streamlining the way that you talk about problem and responsible gaming, by making sure that you are giving opportunities for help the way that people are gambling or participating in this risky activity. But the very first step in arriving at any policy decision is to understand the facts. And right now, we're flying completely blind. Not to mention, I do worry about these competing numbers. It's hard enough to make that first call for help. It's really hard when there's 100 different numbers on the bottom of your ad, and 2 in our state alone, we have no idea where to go.
Are there any demographics out there that let's say, look at that 18 to 24, a lot of those folks are in college. I just happen to have one in college, and they're constantly gambling or betting or whatever. And I just don't know if there's a higher propensity because they're, in college at that age range. And I'd be curious to see some demographics on that.
Young and impulsive and inclined to think that this is a way to either fit in or make some money? Absolutely, sir. And we are starting to see some emerging research exactly about who is more vulnerable. Traditionally, if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said low-income Hispanic or a Black male. Well, we know actually the riskiest population is now highly educated, white, male. Things have changed, they have evolved, so too do the need for response and interventions. And we were already working from a deficit because our infrastructure cannot handle to keep up at the same pace the innovation of the sector has. I've laid out a few of what we believe are the best practices as it comes to addressing this public health issue. The one thing that's clear when we look at all the 50 states and DC, it's very clear the states that have achieved the biggest success, and I deem success as the lowest rates of gambling-related harm, it's been a bifurcated approach. I believe Senator McPike had asked, was this proposal in any way going to take away resources from the addiction experts at the Department of Health? Truthfully, nothing would make me equally more nervous, but I would say that the best scenario here is to push in a lot of money into the regulators so they can work in collaboration. A gaming regulator is not well positioned and educated in addiction services, but they can take that input to decide if something needs to change and be enforced within the way that the businesses are operated in our communities. Which is why I took a liberty here and said the funding should go for not just prevention, treatment, and recovery, but research, prevention, treatment, and recovery. With all due respect to the earlier presentation, I believe that's a glaring gap in the recommendations, that research is not intricately woven in the problem gambling agenda set before you. Prevention and education really should be done in collaboration, and I believe that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission serves as a wonderful national leader here, and I do have that language if anyone would be interested in seeing how they structured the Public Health Trust Fund. As for treatment, I look to Louisiana. Many states will actually sponsor individuals to seek out treatment there as they offer outpatient, inpatient, and they are looking into doing things like teletherapy, which is often heralded as a leader in treating gambling disorder. It has some to do with that anonymity factor, that protective factor. You're not in person with someone, back to the shame and stigma we spoke of earlier. And then recovery. Research highlights that 90% of the individuals that I represent will relapse at some point. Aftercare is vital to ensure that these individuals that are seeking recovery are able to do so and to do so well. I don't want to be redundant in any way. I'm just laying out the things that I feel would be strengthened in a collaborative approach that would allow you to account for certain current trends, things that have shown through other jurisdictions to lead to increased rates of problematic play, from cashless gaming to the average legal age allowed. There are instances where operators will say in certain jurisdictions that we have that capability, but unless a regulator tells us to deploy, we don't. The reality is, because of this very fragmented approach within the Commonwealth and across the US, we are only as strong as our weakest actor. And instead of going to the lowest common denominator, it'd be wonderful to see Virginia really rise up and be a leader in helping mitigate this problem. I appreciate your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'd just like to tell you thank you. We only started really putting a lot of effort into this just a couple of years ago, and both Delegate Kresick, myself, and the other members of this committee have attended several of those. What do you call them? Just meetings, I guess, or of the group, and found that we were 700% increase and all these things, but the team that we have on the ground working this is doing a phenomenal job. But this is very, very helpful for us because one of the primary goals of this committee too, is in setting up the VGC, was to strictly highlight problem gaming. That's why you saw it off to the side, to make sure that we're putting the efforts to the human cost of gambling to try to fix that. If we're going to profit greatly from that, we've got to make sure we're taking what I often call the last and lost among us. So, Senator Eben.
Thank you for the presentation. Question about the Virginia, you had one slide you breezed over about the Virginia helpline versus national helpline, indicating, I guess, there were 3,500 calls to a national helpline as of August 19th, but 967 to Virginia. Do we have two separate hotlines, and is there a reason, or is it better to have our own, or?
No, ideally, actually, we're actively seeking to streamline to create one national entry point. This is not to say we wouldn't get an individual who calls a national helpline to local resources, but it's a way to ensure that there is clarity and consistency. Gaming doesn't operate in a vacuum anymore. You license it, sure. You regulate it, of course. But if you look at the ads at the Super Bowl, did you ever see at the bottom? I mean, it's in size 0.2 font and a paragraph that takes up half the end with all the different helpline numbers. That's in no way benefiting a person in need. And in fact, just because I'm that person, I called the Hope New York number, which is always the largest font because the regulator prescribed exactly the placement of their helpline, the font size of it. And I was met by a very lovely individual who told me that they couldn't help and they wished me well and hung up. This is in no way to the benefit of an individual who's struggling. Moving to one national number will benefit our entire nation and the people of Virginia.
So just to be clear, you would advocate that we direct all our efforts to the national 1-800-GAMBLER and not...
Yes.
There's no reason at all to have a separate Virginia number.
None at all. In fact, I believe it is a detriment to the state to keep it separated.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the dais? Nope, we're good. Thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time. With that, I'll yield to Senator McPike.
I appreciate it. Just up from the last presentation, I know many on this group have done a lot of work on problem gambling and specifically the treatment fund to make sure it's funded well. I think the last September report, I know this chart says it's funded at $2 million. I think revenues experienced were about $2.6 million. So I know the projections are increasing in terms of more revenue. It's just something we need to keep an eye on as we move forward and make sure we're resourced. I think the idea of research is an interesting one. I think it's tough for one state to do it alone, and something I'd certainly like to engage in the congressional delegation in a discussion on, looking at federal assistance that can cover a lot greater resources than just one small commonwealth. So thank you.
I agree. So moved. Delegate Creasy.
Mr. Chairman, I'll repeat what we've mentioned many times, and that is the disparate amounts of money coming from the different stakeholders, the different gambling entities. When you have 2.5% tax that goes from the sports betting, you have 0.08% from the casinos. You have I don't even think charitable gaming has anything. We tried to do that, but that didn't fly. So we do want to make sure that we're getting that everybody is participating in this as well, and we get the resources we need. And it's clearly we're not doing as well as we thought we were doing, and we really appreciate your report. Thank you. We'll be calling on you in the future.
So with that, I think we've come to an opportunity for some public comment. I think we're going to hold that to about 10 minutes. If anybody's brave enough to step up and have some public comment, you're welcome to do that at this time. I mean that seriously. If you'd like to speak, or if you still want to just give written comment to us, we'll take that. So anyone? Okay. Thank you all for the opportunity, for sticking around and bearing with us today. We will have one more meeting in November after the general election to go ahead and formally vote on the process and move forward. So with that, the committee will rise.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.